Good evening. This is a special meeting of the Board of Trustees of the El Paso Community College District. And if you want to log on, this meeting, call toll-free 1-855-797-9485 and enter the access code 924-280-201 to access the call. Then you go to the auto feed at youtube.com/goepcc. Any member of the public wishing to make a comment or question regarding the agenda items on this can email your comments to the following email address: boardquestions@epcc.edu. All backup and related materials for the meeting can be accessed at the following link: epcc.edu/administration/board. Pamela, can you take a roll call of the board members?
Yes, sir. Mr. Uxer.
Here.
Ms. Sanchez. Ms. Sanchez.
Right now, we need to stop.
Okay, we're going to stop just for a moment. There's been a problem with the streaming feed, so give us just a moment, everyone.
Okay, we're back on. Continue with the board members, please. Roll call.
Mr. Uxer has already responded that he is here. Mr. Uxer, are you on the call? Mr. Uxer, are you on the call?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm here.
Ms. Sanchez.
Here.
Mr. Robles. Here. Ms. Nahed.
Here.
Ms. Pena.
Here.
Dr. Graham. Here. Mr. Haggard is here.
Board members, we're going to move down to item 1.8 of the suggestion for Ms. Darcy. We're going to discuss 1.8, 1.9 because we have people that are standing by and they may have other places to go. So we're going to go with 1.8 first. Pam, can you read the motion, please?
Item 1.8, discussion and action to approve full-time staff and faculty recruited in positions funded by the institutional budget.
Move to approve.
Do I have a second?
Second, Bonnie Nahara.
Any discussion?
This is Christina Sanchez. I'd like to have some discussion, please.
Go ahead.
Yes, so my understanding from the last meeting that we had, I thought that there was a bit of a pause in accepting and moving forward on the approval of the full-time staff and faculty in these positions at the time. I wanted to see or know if there has been any changes or any change in the recommendation. For me, I am not at this point ready to move forward with this item until I hear and receive a budget overview and update. That's where I stand, but wanted some feedback from everyone else.
I have the same questions regarding the budget. This is Carmen Graham. Do you have other information regarding the funding for the position, Dr. Terraza?
Thank you, Dr. Graham. Members of the board, I trust that everyone is doing well and staying healthy. Thank you for meeting with us this evening. At the last board meeting, we had approximately 18 positions that we were looking at moving forward. Each of these respective positions are either slight adjustments, as you see in the case of one of the positions that is listed there. In addition, these are employees that are already employed that have received, that have earned credentials, which then qualifies them for the college's procedure of a slight salary increase based on the credentials, the education credentials that they have earned. So none of these, and one is an emergency temporary position. We felt comfortable moving these forward from the last one. These were brand new positions. We have frozen all of those positions. These particular ones that are listed here, we do have in the budget. They were, as I said, either slight increases based on increased responsibility, a temporary position, as well as advancement for educational achievement.
Dr. Strada, I have a question on that. This is John Uxer.
Go ahead, Mr. Archer.
If these are administrative positions and the positions are not filled, do we have a organizational problem in being able to certify them and carry on business? Either can they be done, or will it all have to involve upward, where I guess Mr. Smith has to do everything?
One of them, you're right, Mr. Archer. One of them is a dean level position that is simply going from the interim into the regular position the committee has selected. There is no budget implications with regards to that. The previous position will not be backfilled. We have frozen that position. But to answer your question directly, yes, these are positions that we need to continue to move the institution forward. Again, none of them are brand new position. There is one temporary position. But all the full-time regular positions that were at the last board meeting, which again, if I'm not mistaken, it was 18 total positions, those remain frozen.
I have a question, sir. This is Carmen Graham. Is there a projection that those that are frozen right now might be reconsidered? And so what are you looking at in that time frame?
So Dr. Graham, it is a great question, and we have a rather robust budget presentation that Vice President Shaughnessy will provide to the board that I've reviewed numerous times, which will provide 6 different scenarios to the Board of Trustees. We believe that it's in the best interest that should we bring anything back to the board, it will be on a case-by-case process based on the demand and need. If enrollment ends up being coming in at a larger or closer to last year's level, then we believe that we can come forward and recommend to the board that some of these positions be considered. But until then, we believe it's in the best interest to freeze open positions.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Graham.
Any other questions?
This is Christina Sanchez, and this is just a comment from me. I am not ready to vote on this item yet until I receive the budget presentation. It's already been called. There's already been a motion and a second, but that would be the only reason that I would not vote in favor of this item. And I want to put that on the record, is because I would want a budget presentation that we are scheduled to have on the agenda first before making that decision. But that's my point of view. And I just wanted to make sure that that was out there and placed on the record.
So noted. Any other questions? Call a question, Pam.
Mr. Uxer,
Aye.
Ms. Sanchez,
No, and again, the only reason for the no is until we receive the budget presentation, this discussion is premature. Thank you.
Mrs. Robles. Aye. Ms. Nahara,
Aye.
Ms. Pena, Ms. Pena, Ms. Pena, can you hear us? Okay, we'll move on. Dr. Graham.
Aye.
Okay, we have, and Mr. Haggerty.
Aye.
We have 5 votes in favor.
Motion passes. Can you please read 1.9, please?
Item 1.9, discussion and action on the approval to enter into a contract with Train US Incorporated for the installation of a new 175-ton chiller in an amount not to exceed $250,000 to be located at the Rio Grande Campus H building.
This is
Dr.
Bonnie Nahida, move to approve.
Dr. Serrata, I have a question.
Okay, do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, any questions? Go ahead, John.
Yeah, Dr. Serrata, if we continue, go ahead and continue and have anybody there at Rio Grande, if we continue classes, and I understand we do have some labs and something else, if we delay installing this chiller, I mean, first of all, number one, is it in the budget? And number two, if we delay, what kind of implication does that have to our classes this fall that will be held for whoever happens to be there?
Yes, Mr. Archer, thank you for the question. So this is essentially an emergency purchase, given the fact that the chiller that we had at Rio Grande was 20 years old and it just completely went out. We've repaired it several times. I know Mr. Lovato is on the line and can speak to this, as can Ms. Shaughnessy, but we repaired this one. We did our best with this one. It is 20 years old. We do have this within the budget. It is at a point where we have to replace that chiller.
Any other questions?
I have a question. Is this is Carmen Graham. Is this a brand new unit? And does it have warranty?
This is Rick Lovato. Good evening, everyone. The unit we're planning to replace it with is a brand new unit, Dr. Graham. It has a 10-year parts, labor, and refrigerant warranty. So for 10 years, if anything goes wrong with it, we will not have a problem. If this is approved tonight, and we're able to get a purchase order in the next couple of days, we're still 9 weeks out before this is installed.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Judge, this is Christina. Well, how much is left in our project reserve fund?
Ms. Shaughnessy, I'll ask you to address.
Ms. Sanchez, I apologize, I don't have the exact amount that is left in the project reserve fund, but I can tell you we do have enough funds to cover this particular purchase. But I certainly can get that answer very quickly.
If I might add one more thing, this is Rick Lovato. We did get the final quote today, and the price for this unit with the warranty will be $163,215.
Take $100,000, that's pretty good.
So it's quite a bit less.
Yes, ma'am. At the time I wrote this, we had just lost a chiller, and I just needed to put a number together.
Any other questions? Call the question, please.
Mr. Uxer,
Aye.
Ms. Sanchez,
Aye.
Mrs. Robles. Aye. Ms. Nahara.
Aye.
And I want to make note, I just received a message, Ms. Pena is having some technical difficulties. I don't believe she's back on the line yet. Ms. Pena, are you there? And Dr. Brown? Mr. Haggerty?
Aye.
Okay.
Okay. Can you read, we're going to move back up to 1.6.
Item 1.6, Mr. Fernando Flores, Associate Vice President, Budget and Financial Services, will brief the Board of Trustees on the college's investment portfolio.
I have a support.
There's no voice. I think they're trying to. Weird, no?
Lotus is here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can't hear you.
We're waiting for you to start.
Good evening. Mr. Haggerty, members of the Board of Trustees, Dr. Santa, Cabinet, and audience. This evening, I will be providing you a presentation related to the district's investment. My goal is to provide you a brief review of the many pieces involved in managing, investing, reporting, and the policies and practices in place to safeguard the district's investments portfolio. I will cover college investments policy. It governs very specifically our investments program and how it relates to the Public Funds Investment Act, also known as PFIA. That is the state of Texas law that we must follow as a public entity. Then I will explain the certification program to which we subject our policy to review. Next, I will cover how we meet reporting requirements to the Board of Trustees and the public. We will look specifically where our funds are invested next, and look at where the interest rate environment and how we got the current rate. Finally, we will talk about the day-to-day money management funds. Any presentation on investments in the state of Texas for public entities and governments must include a discussion of the Public Funds Investment Act, PFIA. Chapter 2256 of the Texas Government Code titled Public Funds Investment. PFIA is a statutory law that must be followed when managing public funds. But before we get into this state law, I would like to provide a brief history of a few events that happened in Texas and the United States that led to the codification in 1995 of the current Texas state law that governs the management of public funds. In 1994, before enactment of more stringent investment laws governing public funds, many entities were investing in financial instruments which were hard to understand, complicated, risky, but were yielding very high returns. Some of these investments were structured notes, derivatives, inverse floaters, and other complicated financial instruments. However, they had fantastic returns when they were doing well. But eventually markets turned and many entities lost millions, in some cases, billions of dollars. Case in point, here in Texas, Odessa College was one such entity. Odessa College was heavily invested in mortgage-backed derivatives in 1994 and lost $22 million, half of its endowment. Also in 1994, one of the wealthiest counties in the United States, Orange County, California, filed for bankruptcy after losing over $1 billion on structured notes, including derivatives. These cases involving governmental and not-for-profits show how derivative instruments must be adequately understood by everyone who uses them, not just those in the financial industry. Prove just how toxic derivatives can be unprepared to unprepared and unsophisticated users. That year, there were many other entities that lost very large sums of money across the United States. I would add, EPCC did not lose money. With this background, this brings us to the Public Funds Investment Act. With the amendment of the Act in 1995, some very comprehensive requirements were set in place to govern not-for-profit governmental entities invested in public funds. One requirement for us to adopt an investment policy is it must comply with the Public Funds Investment Act. Very important. I've incorporated in this presentation some of the main requirements and will highlight them quickly. The Public Funds Investment Act covers a broad spectrum of items required to be addressed and guide entity in administering its investments, including items related to the Board of Trustees. Our district investments policy is 12 pages long and addresses all of these aspects. I'm going to highlight some of the main requirements that are most important. PFIA requires that the standard of care be addressed in the policy. This is a requirement that entities should follow the prudent person standard while managing the overall portfolio and exercise good judgment and care, not for speculation, but for investment considering safety. PFIA requires training. Each Board of Trustee and investment officer, while taking office 6 months, within 6 months, will receive a training. So the delegated officers, investment officers, once every 2 years, must receive an investment training session as well. I would add that during our annual external audit, the auditors do test for this training to the investment officers of the district. The Public Funds Investment Act requires that we establish our objectives for our policies. And as you can see, the number one policy is safety of principle. We must apply the prudent person principle. This is the most important objective in our policy, followed by diversification and yield. Also very important is that we set a benchmark, set a goal for which to measure the performance of the portfolio. Later on, we will be looking at the reports called portfolio summaries, where we communicate this information to our Board of Trustees on a monthly basis. We'll be going there in one of our slides a little bit later. Our benchmark is that the portfolio should be designed with the objective of equaling or exceeding the average returns on the 13-week US T-bill rates. The Act requires that we delineate the delegation of authority. Here you can see who the investment officers are for the Vice President of Financial and Administrative Operations, the Associate Vice President of Budget Financial Services, and the Comptroller. Also, very importantly, the reporting aspect of our investment policy says that we will report to the board in a very specific format required by the Public Funds Investment Act. The Act says that we will report no less than quarterly. We submit on a monthly basis our portfolio summary supported by very detailed information on our investments. That is sent to our board on a monthly basis when we send our treasurer's report. The PFIA requires that we establish the authorized and the prohibited investments into the policy. So it is very clear what the investment officers can invest in. Authorized investments include interest-bearing accounts, certificates of deposit, local government investment pools. We can do repurchase agreements, money market funds are some of the authorized. It also is very clear on the prohibited investments. And that is detailed in our investment policy. Also, we must collateralize any funds held in our. Finally, I would say that the investment policy is the policy that directs the school what it can invest in and must be reviewed annually by Board of Trustees and also the Investment Advisory Committee. We will be presenting at the May board meeting, at the end of May, our investment policy for its annual review. One of the things that we do before we send our investment policy to our board for review and our investment advisory committee is that we make sure it is up to date and compliant with the public funds investment. And this next slide in front of you, Government Treasurers Organization of Texas, is how we achieve reviewing our policy. So Government Treasurers Organization of Texas, GTOT, has a policy certification program. And the goal of that program is to make sure that the policy that is submitted for certification adheres to the comprehensive list of requirements of the Public Funds Investment Act. In our case, we were awarded a certificate, which is good for a 2-year period ending April 30th, 2022. PCC first received the first certification in 2002. This is the 8th certification for our investment policy. Other important reviews that happen related to our investments, people that are managing them. The State Auditor's Office requires our investment quarterly reports be posted online. We meet that requirement by posting ours in the financial transparency page of the college website for anybody to view. Satisfy State Auditor's Office requirement. Also, as part of the annual external audit, the CPAs have to opine whether we are in compliance with public funds investment. So that is another review that happens every year, and the auditors have an opinion. So, how do we communicate our investment program to our board? Slide that's in front of you is called a portfolio summary. It is a summary of the investments as of a particular date. In this case, it's August 31st, 2019. Well, I went back to August 31st of 2019 because there's some information that is not presented on a monthly basis in this particular report. Now, before we go any further, I will tell you that the details supporting the portfolio summary is provided to the board on a monthly basis behind the portfolio summary. So for August 31st, 2019, if you look at the yellow section, the first item, the effective yield for pooled and debt service as of August 31st, the yield for the month of August, from August 1st to August 31st, was 2.1738. And then we have the revenue funds bonds separated, and the yield on that was 1.11. When we sold bonds in 2016, we entered into an agreement for a 3-year repurchase agreement, so that rate stayed fixed for 3 years, 1.11. So very importantly here, the benchmark. Here is where you see the performance of the portfolio. The average 13-week T-bill rate is our benchmark, and the average for the month of August is 1.95. When you compare that benchmark to the first row in the yellow section of 2.1738 for the month, you see that for the month of August, we met our benchmark. Now, very importantly, what is different about this portfolio is the next section immediately below the yellow section. Here you have annual information. This information is only presented at the end of August. So we see the annual performance of the overall portfolio for the 12 months ended August 31st, 2019. So you can see here that the annual average was 2.2789 for the year. And then the revenue bonds, since they were in a fixed investment for 3 years, at the 1.11. And the benchmark average for the year was 2.2766. So you compare the yield for the year to the benchmark, and you can assess the performance of the portfolio. Section immediately below also complies with the Act, where the investment officers who have had the authority delegated to them have to sign and attest to the accuracy of the information presented. on this particular report. The next slide shows the portfolio summary for March 31st, 2020, and you can see that it does not include annual averages in it. So in this particular case, the effective yield for the month was 1.1762. That's almost 100 basis points lower than what we just saw in August. Compared to the benchmark for March, which was 0.3840.
Mr. Flores?
Yes, ma'am.
This is Christina. Hi, can I just stop you right there? So where on this, just based on that, and I know it was only through March the 31st, but where would you compare that from where we were last year? I mean, at that point, I guess, and I'm speaking more in terms of where we are, with the economy, just as a result of the COVID-19 matters. But have we seen a difference with the comparables, or will we not see that maybe until another couple of months?
So comparing this to the same point in time the prior year, of course, the economic conditions were very different, and the 0.3840 reflects the Fed rates being lowered progressively beginning in September 2019, September 2019, and several times in the year, the Fed has lowered rates. So different situation as far as the financial markets. The Fed lowered rates on September 21st, 2019 to 2%. October 31st of last year, they lowered to 1.75. And then it really got bad March 3rd, more reflecting a slowdown in the economy than anything else. They lowered down to 1.25, the Fed funds rate. And then on March 15th, following the outbreak of the coronavirus, they went down to a range of 0 to 25 basis points. If we're comparing to the prior year, I think the prior year, the Fed funds rate might have been 2.75. The Fed funds rate drives very quickly the interest rates that are being earned by investments. So I hope I answered your question, Ms. Sanchez. So the economic environment is very different, and our pool reflects adjusting to that climate.
Thank you, Mr. Flores. I just wanted to make those comparables, or just to point out, what those trends may be or what we may be seeing. So thank you.
Yes, ma'am. And towards the end of this presentation, we have a very nice line graph. We're going to see the relationship between the Fed funds rate cratering pretty much, followed by a nosedive by the 13-week T-bills, and then our two investment pools, in addition to our bank. We're going to see that on a line graph in just a little bit. So we've seen two portfolios, and that was meant to show you what we sent to the board on a summary level, and also let you know that we do provide the detail behind that, and it is submitted every month for you all's review. So we get to the next slide, which is actually what are we invested in? So currently, the district invests its funds in two different investment pools and also receives interest revenue from our depository bank to offset bank's service charges. So the first item you see is the bank earnings credit rate. So this rate is the rate that the bank pays us for any cash balances we have in our accounts. So we have check runs and we have still people that get checks, so it's a little bit of float over in our bank. So the bank pays us a certain rate for those funds we have with our depository. And that revenue can only be used to offset bank service charges. Because that rate is so low, we don't keep very large balances. So that's the bank earnings credit. We currently have about 175.8 million in 2 local government investment pools we participate in. These 2 local government investment pools are designed for Texas local governments to provide investment programs tailored to meet the needs of cities, counties, school districts, and other public investors. They seek to provide investors safety, liquidity, and competitive rates. As you heard earlier, the main objective of the investment policy is to highlight safety. And I would say that also aligns with the main goal of the 2 local government investment we invest in. They in turn have their own investment policies, and safety is their number one. Well, one of the very important requirements of our investment policy to do business with pools that must be rated no lower than AAA minus M, or an equivalent by one of the national rating services. The 2 investment pools which we participate in have the highest rating given by Standard & Poor's. They are both rated AAA M, which is the highest rating that can be given for the types of pools we invest in. Another very important criterion of any investment pools we participate in is the composition of their portfolio, which must be investments that are authorized investments in our investment policy. These pools also offer products that have commercial paper in their portfolio, which we may participate in because they have a higher return, but we choose not to because our authorized investments do not cover commercial paper. Some of their the next 2 slides will show the composition of the 2 pools we invest in. You see here the slide for Texpool. They are invested into agencies, heavily weighted into agencies, which is a little bit longer term investment. And then repurchase agreements, 30%, treasuries, 22%, and then money market funds, which are very liquid. So they're getting their liquidity from money market funds and repurchase agreements. And they are about 60%, 63% longer weighted. And then the next pool, and this, before I do that slide, I would like to say that Texpool has a weighted average maturity of 30 days. That's the average time it takes for their investments to mature. And that's very important because we're going to compare that to the next pool, which has a different weighted average maturity, but it has the same type of investments. I would add that all the investments that this pool and this next slide for Texas Daily are participating in are authorized in our investment policy. So Texas Daily also participates in federal agencies to the tune of 60%. Remember, Texpool is at 40%. So Texas Daily is a little bit weighted higher towards agencies, which is a longer term investment. They're invested in treasuries as well, money market fund, repurchase agreement, and CDs. The weighted average maturity for Texas Daily Fund is 47 days. But that means it takes over 47 days for the average maturity to mature. So what we've noticed is after the Feds lowered the rate on March 15th to a range of 0 to 25 points, that these 2 funds started separating in the yield they were providing. To the point where currently Daily is paying us 43 basis points compared to Texpool paying us 28 basis points. So we attribute the difference to the composition of the portfolio, even though they both have essentially the same type of investments. And that's the reason we have two different investment pools. So in a interest rate declining market, as we are in right now, the longer weighted portfolio is going to provide a higher yield. And you see that demonstrated here with Texas State. So this is a slide Mr. Sanchez that I was alluding to on the interest rate environment for 2019 and 20. If you look at the red line on this line graph, starting in September 2019, is at 2%. The Fed rate was at 2%. Then on October 31st, it dropped down to 1.75, and you see the decline in the rate, in the red line. Then on March the 3rd, it moved down to, and then on March 3rd, it moved down to 1.25, and then it went down on March 15th to 25 basis points. The Fed fund rate is very important to the financial markets, and you see the effect that it had on Texpool, which is the green line. They started their descent after the Fed lowered their rate. You see the same thing for Texas Daily, the yellow line. You see their descent. But at the very end, you see where Texpool and Texas Daily are higher than the Fed funds rate because of the composition of their fund and how they're weighted in terms of proportion. The very bottom line is our interest rate that we receive at the bank. We were receiving 60 basis points, and we've been receiving that for a few years from the bank. And then they started lowering their rate in February, and they've gone down to 25 basis points at this point. So the next slide, I wanted to talk about all the supporting areas that go into managing cash and checks and investments. There's a very, very good team led by our comptroller, Ms. Ana Zuniga, and also Ana Martinez, her senior administrative assistants. They are checking their balances on a daily basis. We do business with Wells Fargo Bank, so we are utilizing their CEO system to pull balances down on a daily basis. We have somebody reviewing the money coming in, and we're checking to see if there's anything unusual. So on a daily basis, our comptroller and her office is monitoring the funds that belong to the college. Also, the banking system that Wells Fargo has, one of the things that we like a lot about it is it has a lot of controls. Because when you have funds movement supporting $147.8 million unrestricted fund, and then you have revenue bond money that is being spent, and then you have close to $60 million that is processed for financial aid area, in addition to the grants money that we have, we are in excess of $200 million that we flush through our bank system. So we take a lot of controls very seriously. The system that we have requires two-person authentication for executing wire transfers, for setting up new accounts. The backup for Ms. Zuniga is myself and Ms. Shaughnessy. We're former comptrollers here. We started out in the banking. We support each other in case it's needed, but no one person to initiate a wire transfer. It needs a requester, and then it needs a person to authorize it. So we like those features a lot when one of us is on vacation, another person takes over, a fresh set of eyes looking how banking is being done. We understand that money moves very quick in the world of ACH debits, wire transfers. So we keep an eye on our bank, our balances, and we have a very good team that does that back in the comptroller. The office also transmits ACH files. We have 7 different bank accounts. Treasury is our main general operating account. Does not issue checks. We have a check block on that. Nobody could write a check against that. Then we have our check issuing accounts that are in the payroll all the way down to the state institutional. So most people are on direct deposit. So every other day, the comptroller's office is sending files to the ACH system to pay people, vendors, students, that kind of thing. Also, they transmit files where we're taking in money. When we take credit card payments and we take payments to our TouchNet system, which is our portal for students to pay us, we are receiving payments through there. So that involves ACH files as well, but that's money coming in as opposed to these transmissions I have here, which is money going out. So the comptroller on a daily basis is in touch with our bank balances and also is moving money to cover these frequently occurring check runs that we have. And I'm assuming you guys does a fabulous job of keeping an eye on balances and moving money to make sure that everything's covered. So the next area that I'll cover pretty quickly is our cashiering. So we have cashiers at all 5 campuses, including the ASC Building B. So we have very good support for students to pay us in person if they would like. So last year, the year ended August 31st, 2019, we did 9.8 million in checks and cash. We employ an armored car service that picks up the cash daily, takes it to the bank, safeguards it. And, so we feel we have good controls. We have security at all the doors. We do background checks on people employed to the county. So I want to thank you for your attention, and if you have any questions, which I might answer. Yes.
Do the board members have any questions for Mr. Flores?
I just have one, sir. This is Carmen Graham on the training. Are we in compliance with the board training?
So the board is provided. The board is provided a video which they are required to view, and I would have to defer that question to the president's office. I believe the president's office is very diligent on providing that tape for board members. I would say that tape has been provided to any board member as required.
This is Pam Payne. When the trustees are elected, they're only required to watch the video one time. All of the trustees on our board have been given that video and have watched it, but for those of you that have been on the board for a number of years, you only had to watch it the first year. The video itself has not changed. I've changed since you came on. But it has been given to all of the board.
I think it was an 8-track one.
Judge Haggerty, this is John Uxer. I'd like to comment.
Yes, sir.
Okay, Mr. Flores, 2 things. First of all, I want to compliment you and your organization on the financial performance reflecting outstanding professional and technical judgment. Number 2, I appreciate and compliment you on a comprehensive presentation. It was clear, easily understood, both an overview and particularly reflecting what is happening in today's environment. It was clear, easily understood, without being condescending. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Any other questions?
This is Carmen Graham. My other question is that on the investment policies, I know that we have reviewed them, but do you know if that one has been run by or does it need to be reviewed by them?
I'm sorry, ma'am, run by who?
Kathy?
Kathy? A Texas Association Board that's supposed to be reviewing our policy?
Oh, no, the requirement is, the requirement is that it must have an annual review by our Board of Trustees, number one. The requirement is that the Investment Advisory Committee review it once a year as well, and that it be presented to the board and for them to review. That is the only requirement of the FIA.
Mr. Flores, this is William. Dr. Graham, it's a great question. And as we continue to transition to have TASB review all of our policies, this is one of the ones that is state law and statute. And so we will ensure that they do that. I know Dr. Penley and her team are leading that transition. It is a phased approach for TASB to review our policies, beginning first with all of the statewide statutes and then coming into more of the local policies.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Any other questions? Thank you so much, Mr. Flores.
Good job, sir.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much.
Hey, Pam, can you read 1.7, please?
Yes, sir. Item 1.7, Ms. Josette Shaughnessy, Vice President, Financial and Administrative Operations, will provide an update on the fiscal year 2020-2021 budget.
Before you start, Ms. Shaughnessy, does anyone want to take a break, or do you want to go ahead and have Ms. Shaughnessy start?
We can start.
All right, go ahead, Ms. Shaughnessy.
Well, good afternoon. Can you all hear me very well?
Yes, yes.
Very good. Thank you so much. Good evening, Mr. Haggerty, Dr. Sedata, members of the board, cabinet colleagues, and members of the audience that are tuned in to this evening's special meeting. It's certainly, thank you so much for the opportunity to present to the board regarding our budget for next fiscal year. And it's certainly, as you know, very unprecedented times. More than ever have we seen, more than ever have we worked really hard on providing an agenda is very comprehensive. And I do apologize in advance for a lot of the information that you're going to see. Certainly a lot of numbers, but also a lot of very important information for the board and for the public to hear, as well as our employees. First, I would like to go over the agenda very, very quickly. I will provide an update of the budget development process since our last budget workshop. We'll go over the strategic planning that we were actually undertaking prior to COVID-19. We'll go over the strategic planning with COVID-19 since it has pretty much invaded our lives, and it's very important to talk about what kind of havoc it has created for all of us, aside from the health crisis. Budgetary measures that were taken as a result of COVID-19. We'll go over the little silver lining with the CARES Act funding. And we'll also have a review of fiscal year 19-20 projected revenues and budget, because I know the board wants to know where we're at for this fiscal year. How we're going to end the fiscal year. And then, of course, the core of the presentation, going over the 2021 projected revenues, the preliminary budget, the review of the budget strategies, and then our next steps. So I'd like to just provide a quick overview of what we've been doing so far with the budget development process. And this is really a normal process, either with COVID-19 or without COVID-19. Budget workshops with the budget heads were completed in February. The budget requests completed by the executive level were submitted to the budget office, in spite of the many, many challenges that many of the executive level areas were experiencing in submitting their budget in working remotely. Those budget requests were compiled by the budget office to generate the baseline budget that I will be discussing in a little while. We're still working on scheduling meetings with the vice presidents. We do that every year. And so we're going to continue doing that remotely, of course. We'll talk about the preliminary budget reviewed that was reviewed with the president to include revenue projections. Normally, June, July is the review and approval of the additional funding request by the president. This is under normal conditions, and so we know we are not dealing with normal conditions right now. So those funding requests obviously will be scrutinized. Normally, in the May, June, July timeframe, we provide budget workshops with board trustees. So today is one of quite a few that we will be providing through August. And then in August, all of these efforts will culminate in the adoption of the budget by the board of trustees. So prior to COVID-19, this is what we were looking at. We're looking at current fiscal year revenue, still being the basis for revenue projections for fiscal year 2021. We also have to consider that in strategizing for next year, 2021 represents the second year of the biennium with no additional state funding. This is under normal conditions. The budget for 2021 is based on the rollover budget. This is a normal procedure, and it's adjusted usually for salary savings, and I'll talk about that in just a little while. Under normal condition, additional requests are considered only for essential needs, such as increase in overhead costs, benefits, and other critical services. And as part of our normal process every year, we always consider our employees, and we always look at evaluating the salary enhancement package to obviously recognize our employees, faculty, staff, full-time and part-time. And it's very important first to demonstrate our appreciation for the work that they do, but also remain competitive in retaining faculty and staff. So that evaluation always takes place under normal conditions. So now we have COVID-19, and God knows that has created a lot of havoc for us. And I'll talk about that in just a minute. So what are we looking at for the 2021 budget? As I mentioned earlier, second year of the biennium, state funding is going to be based on the 86th legislature, and we're going to be getting we're supposed to be getting the same amount of money, which is the $2.1 million. What is also different this year from the previous year is we just started a base year with the second minimester of spring. And that base year is going to run through spring of 2021. And the importance of that is here the value of obviously enrollment during that base year. The more enrollment we have, the more contact hours it generates, then it is the basis for the state funding that is decided by the next legislative session that will take place in January of 2021. One of the things that we continue experiencing prior to COVID-19 is a continued enrollment challenge with the shift in enrollment demographics. So coupled with a low unemployment rate, which was 3.7% in October of 19, we know it's going to be different in October of 2020. In October of 19, 3.7%, which is one of the lowest we've been experiencing for a few years now. And so that means that our students, instead of coming to school traditionally, they are working because the economy is doing so well, and right now they don't have any reason to go back to school because they have a good job and they feel like they don't need the schooling to get the pay that they are getting while they are working. So of course we know that's going to change. So the other thing that we also considered in planning strategically for our next year's budget is the Board of Trustees approved a tuition increase in February of 2020 that is effective fall of 2020. And that is part of our biannual review of our tuition rates. And it's usually implemented during the second year of a biennium when we don't have additional funding. So in order to generate additional revenue to cover our budget, we initiate a tuition increase, or we implement a tuition increase. And that program was implemented back in 2016. We're also looking at planning for operating expenses of the facilities. So during this fiscal year, we did have some additional resources to operate the campuses that did open during the fiscal year, but that was prorated budget. So now we need to plan for a full year of operating expenses for next year. And then notwithstanding any changes in those GASBs, we also continue to be impacted by the implementation of GASB 68 and 75. And hopefully for 1920, we hope that we will not have an impact of $6.4 million like we did when we closed fiscal year 18-19. And that impact was mostly due to changes in assumptions and actuarial assumptions that the state provided. And excuse me. And so that was passed on to the entities. So we'll talk about that a little bit later because we know that the investment market is going to have a certain impact on those GASBs. So now we're looking at COVID-19. So as you know, COVID-19 has certainly changed our lives and certainly for quite a while. So what is it that we are looking at when dealing with COVID-19? Not only did it create an unprecedented crisis through the entire world, but also created a very serious economic crisis. And so never before have we ever seen a situation where all of our sources of revenue are going to be impacted. And so this is certainly more than a perfect storm. This is certainly something that nobody was really ready for. And so what is it we need to worry about? Well, we need to plan potentially for an enrollment decrease in the non-dual credit students during fall of 2020, potentially going into spring of 2021. And this is a result of, number one, the continued health crisis, and also the fact that we transition, because of that health crisis, we had to transition from our face-to-face instruction to online or hybrid. And because we are looking potentially at doing a hybrid in the fall, we could see a decrease in enrollment. That may be mitigated. And the way that may be mitigated is, number one, we have ongoing student calling campaigns. And in fact, those ongoing student calling campaigns are certainly have borne some fruit because now we are seeing a change or an improvement in our summer enrollment and potentially that will spill over to our fall enrollment. And also the unfortunate expected high unemployment due to the economic crisis. So it's kind of one of those situations where you know the high unemployment is unfortunate, but at the same time will provide some opportunities for enrollment at El Paso Community College. So enrollment is going to impact obviously tuition and fees. The next thing that is truly now we know it's a threat and it's probably a certainty at this point for fall for next year is to plan for an expected decrease in state appropriations due to lower revenue for the state during the economic downturn created by COVID-19. The state has already stated that they are expecting budget reductions for all state agencies, and higher education will not be accepted from that. So we are looking at, we've heard the rumors that this summer could be impacted, but those rumors were dispelled very quickly. However, the fall next year is very probable, and anywhere from 10% to potentially 20%, but most likely 15%. So you'll see in the budget strategies that I'm going to explain in a little while that we are actually providing budget strategies based on anywhere from 15% to 20%.
Ms. Shaughnessy?
Yes, sir.
I hate to interrupt, but just one real quick. You're talking 10 or 15%, but I think if we talk 15%, are we talking about somewhere between $4.5 and $5 million?
Yes,
I mean,
so
I think if we say that it's going to be that as opposed to, I mean, a percentage, yeah, okay, but we're talking $5 million. Okay,
yes,
that's all I had to say. So
absolutely.
I apologize.
So 10% of $32.1 million is right there, $3.2 million. So
Yep.
20% would be over $6 million. Yes, sir. Very good point. So, and that's really something that I did emphasize yesterday during our forum or the town hall that Dr. Sedata presented, and try to kind of make an impact here. I'll try and understand what that is, certainly. Thank you, sir. The other threat, of course, is because we are in a base year and the legislature is meeting next January, and because they are facing some deficits, is that reduction in state funding for this fiscal year is going to spill over to the next biennium. And that would be a 2-year period. So planning for lower funding by the state during the next biennium, and a lower enrollment during the base year will certainly impact funding decision during that next legislative session, unless the state considers a different period for the base year. But even if they were considering a different period for the base year, they're still going to be looking at a reduced budget in light of their own fiscal crisis. And we've had those fiscal crises with the state. The one I remember very vividly is in 2003, when they cut us basically in the middle of the second year of the biennium, and then that decrease pretty much was projected to the following biennium. Same thing in 2011. So we're talking here some humongous amounts on our budget. Lower property tax collection is also another threat. And the tax revenue will not necessarily be impacted. We book a tax revenue that is based on a certified valuation that would be announced in July. Usually July 25th is when they have to announce the valuations. There is not necessarily a threat to the valuation itself, as far as I know right now. We have not had a chance to meet with the CAD. We're scheduled to have a meeting right after spring break, and of course, the situation just changed those plans, and I'm going to reach out to Ms. Gilmore to find out when we're going to have our meeting remotely so we can understand what is happening. But our understanding is that the valuations are really not going to be impacted. This is not a reevaluation year for residential property. It is still a reevaluation year for commercial property, but not for residential property. But with the economic downturn for many businesses, that will affect their ability to pay property taxes on a timely basis. So what we're looking at is having to reserve a higher set aside for uncollectible account. It doesn't mean we're not going to collect them, but it might take much longer than just your regular year to collect. We do charge penalty and interest as it allowed by law, and so that's helped us recover some of that. But the bottom line here is we could be affected for quite a while before we can get a full tax collection. So the different budget strategies that I'm going to be presenting in a while will reflect different scenarios of percentage of collection. Right now, we collect over 99% of tax revenues, of the tax levy. So you'll see the different scenarios that do address the ability to collect, whether it is from 99% all the way to 90%. And then, as Mr. Flores mentioned, our interest rates have gone down significantly. We had budgeted about $2.2 million for this current year. We anticipate to collect a little bit less than that, about will be $900,000 less in interest income for this year. But for next year, we're talking about $1.9 million. And that's a lot of money. That's a lot of money when you have used that as a way to fund an operating budget of $147.8 million. So as Mr. Flores mentioned earlier, with the Fed fund rates lowered from 2% in September of 2019 to a range of now pretty much 0 to 0.25% or 25 basis points, interest income on government pools is going to be substantially lower. And then, as if this was not enough, we may have to plan for higher unfunded liability related to the implementation of GASB 68 and 75. And mostly 68, because 68 deals with our pension liability, and those funds are heavily invested in different markets, which of course have been affected by the crisis. And so we are looking at those rate of returns being much lower on that investment package for the pension plan. And so for fiscal year 2021, we will have some kind of impact, and that impact will probably continue in 21, 22. And the reason why is because the measurement period is always a year behind. So for at the end of this fiscal year, the measurement period will be the previous fiscal year, which was in an upturn in the market. So we're not going to see, if anything, we'll probably see an improvement, maybe even see a decreased liability at the end of this fiscal year. But the following fiscal year, we're going to see the effect of that investment market that has really that has a downturn. So we need to really be prepared for that. We don't budget that because it is just so unpredictable. It is not a cash flow. It is an accounting reporting, but it does affect our overall fund balance, but it is not a cash flow. So, but we do treat it as if it were a cash flow. So we try to protect our fund balance against it. So as a result of COVID-19, I just wanted to go over some of the current cost containment measures, because as soon as we realized, and at the time we were really trying to, not only we were dealing here with obviously a significant health crisis, so in the midst of making sure that our staff, faculty and staff were working remotely and were protected against the spreading of the virus and staying safe and healthy, then we had to really grapple with the economic reality. And so in light of what may happen in the fall, we figured we better take some very cost containment measures that certainly bode well to help us with next year's budget. So, of course, the first and foremost thing, as a measure of safety for everyone, we cancel travel until further notice. And it's not just a budgetary measure, but it's certainly first and foremost a safety measure. We froze recruitment of vacant full-time position. And right now it is all positions are being frozen except those that we'll have to bring to the board because they may be critical for our safety or for the instructional delivery for our students. But right now, the numbers that I'm going to be showing in a little while implies a complete freeze. We are scrutinizing the need for part-time staff. Part-time staff, obviously, is if we have them, it's because we need them. But at the same time, in light of looking at the non-essential function, we're going to need to scrutinize, the essential part of our part-time staff. We have postponed non-master plan construction projects. So all of our internal projects that we had, that were budgeted, we have decided we're going to postpone that until we evaluate the budgetary situation. Now, mind you, these projects are one-time kind of funding, and they are funded from usually either the project reserve fund, but they are one-time funding. So postponing them certainly saves some money in the meantime, but it does not necessarily fund the budget itself. We also postpone non-critical capital equipment purchases, and we are scrutinizing the procurement of goods and services for essential needs. So right now, the vice president are asked to approve all requisitions that are going through purchasing and basically determine, how essential is it. And so certainly this is something that is always very important to do during this time of need. We are working on our reservations.
Ms. Shaughnessy, this is Christina. I just had a question.
Sure,
whoever can answer. In terms of the essential needs and the scrutiny of those goods and services, right now I would imagine that would probably be items related to how the college responds to the current crisis that we're in. And so I'm not sure if this would be universally, whatever standard that is that universally applied throughout the department so that everybody is on the same page with what those essential goods and services may be, or is it up to each individual department that kind of makes that assessment? And the only reason I ask this question, I'm not trying to get into the weeds of this. I just want to ensure that if this is identified as a current cost containment measure, that there's at least some sort of standardization as to what that means right now or for the immediate future for college personnel.
Absolutely, Ms. Sanchez. And this certainly is a very good question because obviously essential could be subjective. And what is essential to me may not be essential to somebody else. However, obviously, anything that is PPE is essential. So all of those, and those actually, we're trying to centralize those purchases as much as possible because we're keeping an inventory and we want to make sure that those PPEs are being used for the staff, the faculty and staff that are going to be coming on the premises, starting next week. So that has been certainly a priority. But we also have some requests for, let's say, somebody's computer is failing. We need to provide that kind of support. Somebody's working from home and they have a computer that is failing that needs to be replaced. If, for example, we have some instructional supplies that need to be ordered because this is the time of the year we start ordering for next fiscal year. Those are considered to be essential because we need to have, obviously, lab supplies, kind of instructional supplies for CT courses, health courses, all of those that are really considered essential in order for obviously students to facilitate instruction for our students. So our vice presidents have the authority and also have the judgment to decide what is essential and non-essential. And we trust that our vice presidents are doing exactly that.
Ms. Shaughnessy, Ms. John Uxer, I have a question. Actually, Dr. Serrata, do we actually have a executive level approval and review of policy for this across the board so that we actually ensure that it's done consistent with needs as opposed to a blanket one-size-fits-all policy?
Yeah, it's a great question, Mr. Uxer. What we've done since right after spring break, actually during spring break, we started to have cabinet calls with regards to COVID-19 and how we would deal with it appropriately. As we continue to move forward and saw the impact to our budget, we have spoken during those calls. We do have an executive level. Each of the vice presidents has approval that then comes to me. They will then advocate that they need that particular purchase. But we have provided that guidance to each of the cabinet members as we have those calls. We were having them daily initially. We're having them bi-weekly now, Mr. Uxer.
So we actually have
So, for example, one of the items that you approved was the chiller. That was one that came up through Ms. Shaughnessy, Mr. Lovato, Ms. Shaughnessy, who alerted me of the need. And it was obvious to be an emergency, and it was a need that we truly had. It is a significant purchase, as you heard, over $163,000, but it's one that it's a must-have, not a nice-to-have. And so we went forward and brought it to the Board of Trustees for approval.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
So one of the things that we also working on is, as I mentioned, the last bullet that I covered is that we are holding off on hotel reservations of large groups, and that makes perfect sense in light of the continued health crisis. It's still very uncertain, and certainly making kind of commitments with hotels we could potentially incur some deposit cost. We decided we're going to hold off until we have a better understanding, one, of the budget and of course of the health crisis still going on, especially if we're expecting a resurgence in the fall. So right now we're holding off on hotel reservations for, and I'm talking here about staff retreats. Unfortunately, we're talking about your faculty retreats, your leadership academy kind of thing. Any large group where we're going to have a large group that are going to be present, we're holding off on those hotel reservations. So it's certainly in light of, again, preserving the safety of our staff and faculty. And certainly the one thing that we continue to do is review our budget for budget savings identification that will help mitigate any potential revenue deficit for next year. Anybody has any question about this? So, in a crisis, you have a little silver lining, and the silver lining came from the federal government during the, from the stimulus package that was that was passed by Congress. And as part of that stimulus package, the CARES Act funding was created. And CARES Act stands for Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security, CARES Act. We, along with other community colleges in Texas, received some significant funding, partly significant in comparison to what we might not have received. So the total for El Paso Community College is $16,590,145. And we're also eligible for supplemental funding because we're a Hispanic serving institution. And we are positioned to receive a little bit over $1 million, $1,041,230. And that CARES Act basically establishes and funds the higher education emergency fund relief sections 18004A1 and 18004C in a direct institution to use no less than 50% of funds received under these sections to provide emergency financial aid grants to eligible students. It also allows institutions to use that the other 50% to cover any costs associated with significant changes in the delivery of instruction and support services due to the coronavirus after March 13, 2020. And that date is very important. It was a proclamation of the national emergency, and it is also pivotal in terms of what can be eligible to be reimbursed by the CARES funding. For our students that were totally online prior to March 13, 2020 are not eligible for this funding. And of course, any expenses that were incurred prior to March 13, even if it was related to COVID-19, are not eligible for this funding. So this date is significant. So what does that mean for our students? 50% of that is going to our students, directly to our students. A little over $8.2 million. And the purpose is to provide emergency financial aid grants to students for expenses that are related to the disruption of the operation due to the coronavirus, including food, housing, course materials, technology, healthcare, childcare, transportation costs, a wide variety of expenses that really created a hardship on our students. And so it is designated only for students who have applied for are eligible to complete the FAFSA. The financial department, as we speak, is working on actually distributing the very first phase of that funding to students. And they have developed a very thorough process that includes an application process for our students. And our students can actually receive up to $750, depending on the need that is documented in that application. And so far, EPCC has received the authorization in our G5 in the system, the federal online screen that reflects the award. And we have until August, we have 12 months to spend money, and we have until August 4th, 2021 to actually draw down those funds.
Ms. Shaughnessy, can I just stop you really quick? This is Christina. How are we getting that information, and how are we communicating to the students about the availability of this funding for them, for these emergency financial aid grants?
So it's William. I'll start, Ms. Shaughnessy, and then please feel free to jump in. We just received the funds last week. We implemented a very simple form that we launched today, actually this morning, Ms. Sanchez. We have put it on the web page, and we have turned around, and all our currently enrolled students, we have sent a general email to all of our currently enrolled students, and we actually are already starting to process requests for this aid.
So when I guess for the general students, is it when you say general students, are you talking about like the entire student population, or have we identified those who are eligible for this specifically because they've completed the FAFSA?
So we have identified who qualifies that's currently enrolled, but we went ahead and sent it to all students that are enrolled as well, because some may not have applied for FAFSA, but are still eligible, and they can attest that they're eligible. And so we sent it to the entire spring enrollment, Ms. Sanchez.
And my question was to Dr. Serrata. This is Carmen. If we could use that for incoming new students that are not currently enrolled or to recruit them, but there's limitations on the recruitment, right, Dr. Chavarria?
That's correct, Dr. Graham. The act was very clear on what we could and couldn't do. And so one of the things that we couldn't do is it cannot be used for marketing or to recruit students. It was very specific to that particular nature. These are calls that I've been on at the national level with the Department of Education. We had asked several different questions, and every time the DOE provided guidance, it became more and more stringent on how the funds could be used. But we do now have all of that in place. A lot of kudos. It's on social media. We're advertising it on Facebook as well. It's on our homepage, as I indicated. We continue to move forward. This plan that Ms. Shaughnessy is reviewing is a plan that we came up with in Cabinet on the 30% for the spring, 30% for the summer, 30% for the fall, and the remaining 10% next spring. If the demand is higher than anticipated, we will adjust accordingly. So we will adjust those percentages accordingly. I've talked to some colleagues in the first week that they had theirs up and running. Most institutions started this week. A few started last week. We've had over 4,000 requests already. So we continue to move forward. We continue to monitor it, but a lot of work from IT on developing the programming, the SQL language for this. Ms. Lopez in the financial aid department, in Dr. Gonzalez's division. And then obviously it's finance, setting up the process, because it can be distributed from one area. We have to have the checks and balances in place. So finance plays a role in this, as well as the financial aid office.
I have another question. This is Christina. So and I know this money and y'all are putting it all together, but I guess in terms of like any of the healthcare piece or the childcare piece, and even I guess with the food and housing, are you, I'm assuming we disperse these funds, that there's stringent requirements that are tied to that as a result of CARES, but is there also the ability, I guess, to stretch that funding and to stretch that support out for these students with any partnerships with any of the other community-based organizations? And I'm just thinking of like the YWCA, for example. I know they're developing a pretty robust effort to assist individuals with childcare services right now, to include respite care for those individuals who are essential workers who are out there working and just need a break, and to have their children in some sort of organized, productive setting. Are we looking at that, or how is that?
It's a great question, Ms. Sanchez. It's a really good question, and it's one that we looked at as well. So we were initially, when there was first word that we were going to receive these funds, we were planning to look at it to help students the most possible. And so in other words, we thought if they're registering for an online course, then we can actually supply them with the laptop, use these resources, buy the laptop, provide them that laptop. We actually cannot do any of those things. So all that we do is receive the application. We do have on the application, is it for child care? Is it for food needs? Is it technology? Is it transportation? We set a max, as is indicated here, of $750 as a max award to be able to stretch that. That would impact over 11,000 students. But we cannot, the money has to go directly to students. We're just a pass-through.
Okay,
Once
so
we determine that they're eligible, then the student can use those resources for whatever they choose to.
And so, I know this is new. We're all trying to work our way through there, but can there be an effort or a plan made? I think 750. I think, if you look at that and you just think of like the needs, and oh my gosh, that's not a lot of money for a student that may have a family. Are we looking then at other ways to assist these students for those other needs, or reaching out to them to identify what other needs that they are faced with or that they're maybe confronting? And the reason I think this is important for students with our institution is we know we got them in, we have them, and we're trying to provide, there's just that I guess that other extra layer of customer service, if you will, or support, so that they are ready and able to come back to the school and to their studies so that they're not just left hanging there and trying to figure out what their plan B is, and really ensuring that they're on that same track when they that they came in with. And that's something that I hope, if you're not already doing so, that the college would consider looking to develop and think through in a strategic way, with the end goal, knowing that these students, if we invested in that on that end, I think it would pay dividends, that they'll be coming back to our college and not give up on that educational piece.
Oh, another great point. So what we're looking at doing, Ms. Sanchez, and what we continue to do in the calling campaign that we launched through being led by Student Enrollment Services, we're reaching out to students that are currently enrolled in this resources. They are the primary target of the CARES Act, is students that were enrolled this spring. And so we are reaching out to them first, encouraging them to enroll for the summer, and the summer begins a new Pell cycle. It is the second Pell for the year, so they qualify for an additional Pell grant this summer that would pay for summer and have resources available to them. Then there's the next new Pell cycle begins in the fall. So as we go forward and we encourage our students, we are by far the best value in higher education in this entire community. And so what we let our students know is, as they register and apply for Pell, then they will have additional resources available to them through the Pell grant. The college, based on our tuition and free fees, a full-time student is looking at less than half the Pell grant. They receive the other half for their expenses, for supplies, etc. So those are some of the resources that we have in place that the students qualify. In addition, we set up, the foundation set up the Stay Strong Fund. We received a $10,000 contribution through our partnership with Excelencia in Education. In addition, philanthropy and local, the foundation board, working with Dr. Gross under Associate Vice President Mo, is providing those funds for students that do not qualify for the CARES Act funding. So all of the undocumented students, they do not qualify for the CARES Act funding. And so we have set up a fund, and we've received contributions, limited contributions, but contributions nonetheless, to be able to help those students as well.
Dr. Zarata, this is Carmen. One of the things that I think is along the lines of what Ms. Sanchez is talking about is that the information, while I understand that we cannot go out there and start recruiting students with these funds, but I think that we need to look closer at the partnerships and make sure that the workforce people know that those funds are available, that everybody, like your adult education people, are familiar with what's available. How could there be like a flyer put together that just not recruiting, but announcing that the college has received funds so that it can be advertised in a way that the community knows? Like, for example, all those agencies that I was telling you about that meeting yesterday, all those agencies should know about these funds, but they really don't, because they're so busy with their own issues that they don't really, we certainly should electronically send the information to them. So I think that those partnerships merits a lot of, we're not telling them to help us recruit, we're telling them, hey, this money is available, because they're dealing with a lot of the people that are either having, issues with childcare. And keep in mind that if the schools are not opening and people are being called back to work or going out there trying to find jobs, that presents another challenge, that who's going to help them with the kids while they get an education. So certainly hooking up with the Y and any other childcare providers, they can disseminate information.
You're absolutely correct. We did announce this via press release. Again, today we launched it actually this morning. We sent out a press release to announce it. It will be on the media this evening and this weekend, and we will gladly share it with our partners. Absolutely.
If you send it to Enrique Mata, he can disseminate it with all those agencies that were, I think we were 27 different agencies that were on the webinar yesterday or the day before.
We were glad to do.
The Army has another huge number of collaborative that they're working with, and they are dealing with a lot of youth that are not in school as well.
Absolutely. We will send it out to the partners as well.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Any other questions? So, first, the 50% funding for our students is extremely critical in this time of need. The other 50% of the institutional aid is at $8.2 million. And it is designated to reimburse institutions of higher education for any related expenses that were incurred as a result of COVID-19. Certainly to incur because of educational services or protect students, faculty, and staff from the pandemic. Those requests for funds should be clearly COVID-19 related and justified. There are quite a few restrictions on what qualifies, and we are still trying to understand what those restrictions are, because it is federal funding, and we're going to have to make sure we're able to back up any kind of expenses that we charge to that $8.3 million. Additional aid can be provided to students from that funding, and those spending rules evolve on a daily basis. Because of all the questions that are asked from the different entities that have received this money, the Department of Education is always providing additional guidance and FAQs. Upon receiving the 50% student aid, EPCC submitted the application for the second block of funds. And I am very pleased to report that as of May the 12th, we actually have received the authorization to draw down whenever we are ready. And we have 12 months from the award date, so we'll have until May 12th, 2021 to spend that money. The plan here is to reimburse EPCC for expenses that resulted from COVID-19 incurred after March 13, 2020. So we are currently tracking in our accounting system through our requisition system for our purchasing, through basically it has to be obviously expenses that are actually incurred. They cannot just be estimated. And so identify all technologies, hardware, software, training that have been purchased to deliver effective online education to improve and enhance students' learning opportunities. We are in the process of identifying any refunds that we make to students because of class cancellations, such as your CD classes. The distance education fee that we waived may be effective for, actually eligible for reimbursement. We also are in the process of identifying all costs that are incurred in assisting employees in working remotely from home. So we're talking about mostly technology here. And then, of course, your PPE related costs and sanitary products, and all of those are being tracked in order to make sure that we can actually charge them to the grant. So once we charge them to the grant, obviously they are not going to be part of our operating budget, and they will not hit those expenses at the end of the fiscal year.
Ms. Shaughnessy, this is Christina. We can track our expenses from March 13th, 2020 till when? Did they leave it open, or is it till the end of the calendar year?
Basically, any expense, any COVID-19 expense related, any COVID-19 related expenses will be eligible for reimbursement. So we're looking here at since March 13, 2020, we do have a way to track those, and any expenses from now on until May of 11th of 2021. So we're most likely going to have more PPE. It's going to have to be ordered. We're going to have more technology. We're going to have to technology expense we're going to have to incur. So we're talking about your bandwidth expansion. We're talking about purchasing additional laptops for our employees and faculty because they're going to be working from home. There's a variety of things here that we need to do, make sure that we have the internet for those employees. We need to make sure that we have proper signs, on premises when our staff comes back on premises, whether that is in the fall or later than that, because we know we're going to have to respect social distancing. So anything that is COVID-19 related can be applied towards that funding.
Question, just from my understanding, but okay, so when you say here that upon receiving the 50% student aid, EPCC can submit its application for the second block of funds. So that could be immediately drawn down now, is what you're saying? Or was this like a two-phase approach?
But what happened is that in order for us to get the institutional part of that CARES Act funding, we had to have first applied for the 50% student aid. And now that we have received that, we did submit the application and we were eligible, and we probably received the money a week or 10 days after we applied. So yes, we can start drawing down anytime. Once we have identified those costs, we actually can draw down the money to get reimbursed. As soon as the students receive their money, we issue those checks, we can turn around and draw down the money to get reimbursed. So it's not college institutional funds that are going towards the students or the different expenses we have incurred. It is federal money that is actually being used for that, because we will draw down that money immediately.
And for the students, for the $750 that I guess was on a couple of slides previous, if they apply and if they are eligible, when will they receive those funds?
My understanding is we are starting disbursing as soon as next week. Is that correct, Dr. Senator? Or maybe Dr. Gonzalez can respond to that much better than I can.
That is correct, Ms. Shaughnessy. So if they already had received Title IV funding and they already have an electronic deposit, then as soon as the application is approved, then it'll start to be administered daily, Ms. Sanchez. They will start to receive those funds electronically into their bank accounts.
Approval process.
The approval process is a electronic format that we set up through financial aid. Ms. Lopez, our executive director of student financial aid, set it up with IT. They wrote the script, which identifies and goes based on the CARES Act. So when a student's ID comes through on the application, it goes through that script and indicates based on those parameters if they qualify. If they do, and they have already received Pell in the past and have an account on file with us, it gets deposited directly into their account.
Dr. Serrata, do you know if the university also received extra funds?
They did. So Texas as a whole received approximately almost $500 million. Our portion was $16.3 million. UTEP actually received a larger portion. If I'm not mistaken, it was just under $25 million. And half of it has to go to, again, the students. The guidelines are based on the Department of Education parameters. And it is, unfortunately, it will be distributed on a first come, first served basis.
And it does not, I just need clarification, it does not exclude new students?
So it does not exclude new students who qualify.
Who qualify, right.
Correct.
So the fact that you're new to the college doesn't mean you are not eligible. You could be eligible.
You could be eligible.
Okay.
That's correct.
Graduates.
Pardon?
Your high school graduates.
Yeah, that's a whole slew of them.
Yeah, other questions we'd like to ask on the student aid portion of the CARES Act?
Chair Haggerty, so our staff is tremendous. So I'm receiving information as the meeting is going. As of 5 p.m. today, we have received 1,696 applications. So far, 676 have been approved, totaling $500,450. Today's the first day. Pending approval in progress for 845 additional applications and 175 that also met that eligibility. So as you can see, the 30%, the plan that we have may need to be adjusted. 30% is approximately $2.5 million, and we've distributed 20% of that the first day.
Whoa, that's great.
Good job. That's one up to your,
We did expect we would have a lot of demand, and that's not surprising in light of the situation. So on the institutional aid, I don't know if anybody had any questions. We will continue. There's a lot of discussion amongst the CFOs of the colleges in terms of what is it we can use it for, and so it's pretty clear that it has to be COVID-19 related. It is not designed to reimburse us for lost revenue. So this is one of the things that we've been kind of working with to make sure that obviously anything that we apply towards that federal funding is eligible, because this is going to be another program that's going to be audited by an auditor at the end of the fiscal year. It's going to be a major program that will be audited by the auditor and make sure that we are in compliance with the rules. So the other supplemental funding, and that's the one we're still not very clear what we can use it for. Our understanding is not as restrictive as the second block of that CARES Act funding, but we're still working on understanding what is eligible. It is additional assistance for minority serving institutions. Paso Community College qualifies under the CARES Act. Is to also reimburse expenses incurred after March 13, 2020. And basically the rule says that recipients shall use the award for recipients' expenses and student grants by 1 year from the date of certification and agreement. We applied on the 8th of May, and it was accepted on the 10th of May. As far as I know, we have not been notified yet. We look into on G5 on a regular basis. But that is one portion of the CARES Act. We still have not had authorization for that amount. So the plan is to identify any and all institutional expense eligible to be submitted for reimbursement, including additional aid to students. So that can be used also for students.
This is Christina. Do we know if there are any plans with any other federal legislation to include additional funding for higher education institutions? Do we know if that may be a possibility? Have there been talks? Have there been any other conversations about that?
We do, Ms. Sanchez. There was another bill that was passed actually today by the department, by the House, rather, by the Democratically led House. It was a $3 trillion bill that was passed today. It has to be taken up and approved by the Senate. It currently includes $90 billion in state fiscal stabilization funds for education, $27 billion of which would be reserved for public higher education. The CARES Act was about $14.5 billion, so this is nearly double that. There are some specifics it provides. It's less than what we were advocating. AACC, I'm on the board for AACC and the Big Six, which includes the 6 largest higher education organizations, AACC, ACE, which is the lead organization. There's the Big Six. They were advocating for over $46 billion. This bill that the House passed has about $27 billion. It's very clear where it goes to and what they're looking at. I have to be very honest, the Senate has expressed no appetite to take it up.
Dr. Sabata, this is Carmen. A couple of the webinars that I have access on some of the conferences that they cancel in person, but they have them virtually. They have some good information. It's just hard to keep track of all the ones that are coming up. Do you think you might be able to get someone to help us or send us a little note when those seminars are being offered? I know Pam sent me one and it was really, really good. Good discussion, good update. but I don't know that the rest of the board are accessing those, but they're very good percentages.
The webinars have been well, absolutely, and so what we will do, Dr. Graham, is we'll continue to monitor the webinars that we receive and send those to the board. ACCT has done a couple of them. I know AGB has done a couple of them. We will continue. We certainly understand and respect many of you are continuing with your daily responsibilities at your respective careers, and those don't stop. As I know, the meetings have actually increased. The East Coast starts earlier than we do, and the West Coast goes later than we do. And
that's true, because you get the information that it says 1 o'clock, then I took up at 1 o'clock and it's already over because they were talking about 10 o'clock hours.
Correct.
Or something like that.
That's correct. But we will make sure that we send those, that we forward those appropriately to the board so that if you have the time, that you're able to attend them. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Ms. Sanchez, I don't know if you had any more questions. It is not what we want. It's not as much as we wanted, but we would never turn this away. I just keep up with this. And again, on my weekly calls at the national level, and I watched the news last night where Leader McConnell said that they had no interest in taking up the $3 trillion bill that Speaker Pelosi and the House passed.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
So now we talked about the CARES Act funding, which I expected would certainly trigger a lot of conversation. I'd like to now present to you our revenue projections for this current fiscal year. And these revenue projections are based on obviously what we have collected so far in tuition. We did have a slight decrease in fall and spring enrollment as compared to last year, when basically last year were the basis for projecting tuition and fees for the current fiscal year. So we did experience an overall decrease in tuition and fees revenue. And some of that is also because of the shift in demographics, enrollment demographics. So when you have dual credit and early college, high school that do generate a little bit more enrollment, then those exemptions are going to be a little higher. So here what you see before you is a comparison of something you've seen before, where we compare our projected revenue with the revenues that supported our adopted budget for this fiscal year. And I know this is important to everyone because we want to see how we're going to fare at the end of the fiscal year. So even though we are anticipating a decrease in revenue as compared to the revenue that supports the adopted budget, we're talking about $1.3 million revenue deficit as compared to the adopted budget. So $146,469,331 is what we're projecting for this fiscal year. Mostly supported by your tuition and fees. Your state appropriations are the same. We do not anticipate there's going to be a decrease in state appropriation before August. So we have projected the same amount of appropriation. Tuition and fees, as I mentioned earlier, it will have a decrease as we anticipate, and that takes into consideration a 5% decrease in summer enrollment. But when we prepared this together, actually, at the time, the enrollment statistics indicated we might have a 5% summer enrollment decrease. Mind you, we had looked at originally potentially 24% in summer enrollment, but because we have worked so hard, and I say we, really looking here at Dr. Gonzalez's team, along with the various employees who volunteered, were asked to actually help with the calling campaign, but they were working remotely from home. So that certainly has changed that trend, that we are looking potentially even being pretty much even to last summer's enrollment. Property taxes here is the winner because the property tax revenue that was generated, that was estimated, was based on an evaluation that was certified at 95%. And the CAD last August actually was very, very conservative in estimating valuations lower than what they actually were when the tax bills went out. So that meant an additional $1.8 million tax levy for the college. And this, by the way, is also, does contain a reserve in case we do have some substantial refunds by the end of August. That reserve actually is more like $800,000 to $900,000. So we actually may come in a little bit higher than the $63.8 million that you see before you. Other income here does reflect the decrease in interest income, that $990,000 decrease that we anticipate for this fiscal year. We started the fiscal year with a bang, with 2%, and now we're going to be between probably 25, between 50 and 25 basis points. So obviously that has overall, we are looking at a decrease in interest income. So notwithstanding the self-supporting program that was still under review, if we consider the total operating revenue at $142 million, a little bit over that, then we're still looking at a revenue that can support a budget that is going to come way under what was adopted. And so what you see on this slide here is a calculation of revenue, or compare your revenue of estimated revenue by $146.4 million versus total expenses of $138.1. How do we derive this number? And I would like for you to focus on the expenses on the institutional account. So you see.
I got a question, Josette. Back
Yes,
on
sir.
the last slide, jump to this slide real quick. I know you're trying to get through this, but I have a question. I heard the property tax, but what is this other income? Why did we lose $990,000?
Interest.
So that's totally
The money that we have in the
related
bank.
to interest income, decrease in interest income.
Because other income, I was wondering, where were we making other income with that kind of money?
Yes, so either in the other income here, that $3.7 million, part of that is $2.2 million that was budgeted for interest income for this fiscal year. And we anticipating much less. So, and the other income is also derived from testing fees, is derived from the cost that we recoup from the public high schools for dual credit fee that we charge. It is also, and that's other kind of income, such as, other fees that are not under tuition and fees. But the majority of it, we have some rental income, we have some, and I have here a detail that I can tell you what that other income is. So we mentioned the interest income, we do have some rental income. We have other income. Those are other income that we get at $148,000 a year is related to some income that may have come in the previous year, but we could not book into the fiscal year. So we recognize it as other income. We, as I mentioned earlier, testing fees to the tune of about $475,000 that is budgeted. Our dual credit that we recoup is about $573,000 that is budgeted. So all of that makes up this other income. And that certainly is a good question. Does that answer your question, Mr. Haggerty?
Yes, you did. Thank you.
You're welcome. So I was mentioning about how the projected revenue, the total projected revenue about $146.4 million, how it's going to cover our budget, even though we anticipate a deficit over what we had projected for this year. If you look at your expenses, so expenses, and I would like for you to focus on the institutional accounts, because this is really where your budget savings are going to be incurred. So you start with the budgeted amount at $143,387,032. And then what we do is we kind of take that number and we say, okay, what budget savings have we identified that we know for sure we are going to realize by the end of the fiscal year? So if you notice on the left side of that slide, there is a projected expenditure that says institutional, and it starts with your institutional budget of $143.3 million. And then we basically said, okay, how are we going to end at the end of the fiscal year? Well, we take away, we know the savings from vacancies. we are going to realize, we anticipate to realize about $5.3 million in savings from vacancies. We also have a biennium reserve that we have not touched that is going to be a savings, so 1.9 million. And then we also have savings in terms of cost reduction, because when we have an enrollment decrease, then we do not offer as many sections as we would under an enrollment, under a situation of an enrollment increase. So here we are looking at having a cost reduction or savings, if you will, from part-time faculty salaries of 1.7, almost $1.8 million. And then we also have a contingency fund that we call institutional clearing of $464,000. So when you take all of this into consideration, we are looking at projected expenditures of $133.7 million. And this is probably actually a worst case scenario because many departments do realize savings at the end of the fiscal year. We always opt for, telling our budget heads, look, just because you have the money in the budget doesn't mean you spend it. So you spend it if you need it, definitely, but if you don't need it, save it, because it certainly does bode well to help the college, especially in the kind of situation that we're dealing with. So when you look at back to that chart, and you compare your total revenue of 146 million, a bit over 146 million, and that's taking into consideration our self-supporting account. That is still under review. We know we're not going to realize $4.4 million in revenue. We also know we're not going to realize $4.4 million in expenses. So everything staying the same because they're supposed to balance each other out. When you look at your total revenue and you compare it with expenses, that is going to, number one, you do have a deficit you have a variance in revenue about $1.3 million that is going to have to be made up. And then you have expenses, you have a budget surplus at 9.6 million. So when you compare those two, we're looking at an increase in fund balance about $8.2 million. That increase in fund balance is a one-time addition to the existing fund balance. We cannot, unless you want to approve a deficit budget, we don't use any increase in fund balance to fund part of our budget the following year. So that goes into our fund balance, and this is what also helps us cover any kind of anticipated increase in our unfunded liability for pension and health insurance. So again, this is a conservative way of looking at it. It's a conservative way to increase our fund balance to mitigate any kind of negative or any unfunded liability that gets added at the end of the fiscal year. So just want to give you here a picture of how we look at this. And again, we think this is probably more like a worst case scenario in terms of the 9.6 budget surplus. Any questions about this model? I know this is a lot of numbers here. Did I lose anybody?
No, you didn't lose me, but this is Carmen. I just know you're going to pull some miracles here. You always do.
I'm sorry, Dr. Graham, I did not hear you.
She says you're doing a fabulous job.
Oh,
you're going to pull some miracles with the budget. You always do.
I have a terrific team. That's the secret here. So looking at revenue projections now for 2020. And so this is where we really get into the core of the presentation, because this pretty much sets the tone for all the budget scenarios that we're going to be talking about. So here what you have before you is a best case scenario. And this best case scenario is built on the revenue projections for this year and is assuming also a summer enrollment that is similar to last year, so it does not take into consideration a 5% decrease in enrollment. So because we feel like by next summer, hopefully the trend will have reversed where we have a more positive, a more of an increase in enrollment than a decrease. So here what you're looking at, best case scenario, state appropriation still the same, second year of the biennium, no additional funding. That's the best case scenario. The overhead recovery slightly down, that's not significant for the purpose of the budget strategies. It could actually go up depending on the number of grants that we get by next year. Our local funds, tuition and fees here is enhanced. It's also based on the current enrollment. It's also enhanced by the tuition increase that was approved by the Board of Trustees this past February. Yes.
This is Carmen. Do you have a sense as to whether or not there will be an increase on available grant funds or a decrease?
I think the grant funds, are you talking about the overhead recovery? Or in general grants? So
just in general, because I read or saw something where they were, or actually the commissioner mentioned, the PA commissioner on education, something regarding the extension of deadlines and all of them on the funds. But I started wondering if we're going to see more money made available for funds, or if we're going to see a decrease of money for funds.
And maybe this is something that Dr. Zelata can respond much better, but my understanding is that there's going to be a concerted effort in providing funding for workforce programs. And so the grant funds that we've been getting over the years have been fairly steady. You have seen in your board agendas several items that have come for your acceptance, for your approval of those funds, especially in from TWC and some of those, and I believe probably Mr. Smith or Dr. Farias or maybe or Ms. Mo could respond to this much better. Currently I don't have a good sense for that. I can tell you though it's been very consistent over the years. We've seen a pretty steady flow. Some grants expire and some other grants, and then we get other grants. So I don't know if anybody else would like to chime in to supplement what I've just said, because I know it's not a very complete answer.
Thank you, Ms. Shaughnessy. I'll begin, then I'm going to ask Mr. Smith to also, Vice President Smith, to chime in as well. To date, we have not seen any reductions at the federal level from federal grants. And the federal government does not have to have a balanced budget like our state does. So what I would indicate is that at the federal level, we anticipate that all grants will continue to move forward. The $1 million that was described earlier on the Hispanic Serving Institution is a national federal grant, and we were provided that allocation through the CARES Act as well. At the state level, I do anticipate that state grants will probably be cut. But the federal, and most of our grants are at the federal level. But Mr. Smith, please.
Thank you, Dr. Estrada, and good evening, everyone. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. We actually do anticipate no reduction in federal grants at this point. As Dr. Graham said, most of them have relaxed some of the timelines and deadlines that we're operating under. We maintain really close contact with our PIs and others that are overseeing the grant activities that we do. Dr. Farias and I were having a conversation earlier, late last week. I think there's an incredible opportunity coming down from some of the TWC areas. There's a fair amount of money being funneled into worker retraining and certifications. And so we've got all of our teams looking at that. Joe Ferguson in the business office has been helping numerous small businesses navigate through the current situation and helping them to apply for the funds that are available for those folks as well. So we're actually quite hopeful that in the near term, we'll see a small increase in the grants that we're getting.
And do we have a full team for grant writing? I know that we lost a couple of people here in the past couple of years. Can we replace everybody? And do we have any need to increase the number of grant writers to be more aggressively pursuing this funding?
I'll chime in on the workforce side, and then I'll leave somebody else to chime in on the actual grants office itself. Dr. Frias has done a great job bolstering the workforce development area to go after some of these skills development fund grants and other grants that are available to us, and actually have several in the pipeline right now. So I think in that regard, we're in better shape now than we were a year or two ago. I'll ask somebody else to chime in on the actual grants office.
So a couple of things, Dr. Graham, it's a great question. We've had always an incredibly successful grants office. Mr. Elliott is leading that area where they're doing a great job for us. Even the process of submitting the forms to the federal government for to receive the CARES Act funding actually went through our grants office. So we continue to see great efforts from their part right now. I don't know of a vacancy that they have. We do have an interim director, so that actually is the vacancy. So right now, they continue to move those areas forward where we received Title V funding in the recent past and supplements to that. I will follow up with Ms. Moe. The grants area is under Ms. Moe. I'll follow up with Ms. Moe and Mr. Elliott to see where we are, Dr. Graham. It's a good question.
Just because, you know, if we don't have a full staff or if we need more help, even if we don't hire a full-time, we can contract somebody to help get those funds in the, you know, in the college, I think.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Ms. Moe.
Good evening. So at the grants office right now, we have an interim director that is being filled by a prior grants manager. And so we did have that position under recruitment and we want to fill it. And so any additional assistance we can get to have people looking for funds is helpful. But we do hope that we can get the the director of grants management position filled.
Thank you.
Just I guess another question. You show the 2021 projected revenues at a $2.9 million increase in tuition fees. Is that the amount we're going to bring in with the new fee schedule and the new tuition?
Yes, sir. This takes into consideration the current enrollment for this fiscal year and any additional, of course, it takes into consideration the tuition increase that was approved by the board. It also takes into consideration, obviously, the any kind of additional exemptions that were added because of additional dual credit in early college high school. So this is the net.
Yeah, the same amount of students and non-students as we had last year, right?
Well, depending, so the amount of students, I think in the fall we were at, and I can go through this presentation really quick. Let me kind of run through this really quick, and at the very end of the presentation, there is information regarding enrollment. There you go. And so in the fall of 19, we had 30,153 students as compared to the fall of 18, 30,459. Now this is student enrollment. Tuition and fees are generated from actual credit hours. So even though the enrollment, the difference between the two enrollments may not look as big, we still had we did have a decrease also in credit hours. And so when you have a substantial decrease in, well, not substantial, but when you have a decrease in credit hours, that does impact the tuition revenue for the next fiscal year. Now, the other reason why we are not, well, I'm not quite sure here was your question about why does it include the tuition increase in those revenue projections? Mr. Haggerty, did I answer your question or?
The question was with regards to the just under 3 million, the $2.988 million increase in tuition and fees. Is that based on a flat enrollment?
It is based on flat enrollment, yes, sir. No, this is also based on, you're comparing here an adopted budget versus a projected revenue. So it's basically the $2.9 million variance is directly related to the difference between what we had projected for this year, which did not pan out as we had anticipated, and then our projected revenue for next year.
And then on the property taxes, you have some kind of insight that we're going to make $3 million more than we did last year on property tax?
Excuse me, sir, can you please repeat the question?
The property taxes, you show an increase from last year. We adopted 61.9, but your projected is 65.1. That's a difference of 3.1.
Okay, so let me explain that. So on the property taxes, because it is for next year, what I have incorporated here is an additional $1 million that we should receive due to new property. Every year we have new property tax growth, and that usually generates about $1 million, sometimes a little bit more depending on the tax rate that is adopted in August. So here, what you are looking at is, if you look at the previous, let me see, we were looking at a 1.8 for this current fiscal year, okay? And then you add another $1 million on top of that, that's going to get you close to that $3.1 million. So,
and in the past, when you've done that, you've hit it pretty close. Is that why you come up with that figure?
The way I came up with that figure, Mr. Haggerty, is I took the preliminary evaluation, which is really still kind of iffy because it's always very preliminary, and then multiply by a estimated effective tax rate. And then I also added the new property. So that's how I came up with the $65.1 million. And that also has factored about $900,000 reserved for refunds. So it's still a very conservative number.
Okay, all right.
Actually, in the past, it's been better than what you project.
Well,
So
are you taking, and Phil said, are you also taking, the state tax, that 2.5 tax,
Currently we are not anticipating any change in the rollback rate. This is based on a preliminary tax rate of about 13.5 cents. Right now, our current tax rate is 14.1167. And so when we got our very preliminary numbers, we calculated the 65.1 million based on that very preliminary number, based on a very preliminary effective tax rate. But honestly, we don't anticipate that. We anticipate that to change tremendously. So it's going to be, by the time that we are done with the CAD in terms of our valuation, we could be looking at maybe somebody even higher than 14.11 cents, because that's exactly what happened last year. So we always hesitate to quote any kind of tax rate. This is really looking at what we're currently expecting this fiscal year and then adding the $1 million more or less. So those are really calculated based on current estimates. I don't anticipate this to move very much by the end of July, and let me tell you why. Even though the valuation will change, it will also change the what they call now the no new revenue tax rate. And instead of being called the effective tax rate, now they're going to call that the no new tax revenue rate, or the no new revenue tax rate. So it's equivalent to the effective tax rate. In other words, the tax rate that is needed to generate the same amount of revenue that was generated this current year on the same properties. Added to that, you have also estimated revenue from the new property, which is about $1 million. Sometimes a little bit higher, like I said, depending on the tax rate. Does that answer your question?
You won't get the correct figure until the end of July.
Yes, sir. This is still very preliminary because, again, we'll get an additional preliminary valuation at the end of May. We'll get another one at the end of June. And then on July the 25th, we'll get the certified valuation. And even that, because they usually certify, they have to certify at 95%. You still have that 5% that could also be, because that's where you have a lot of protests, and those, may be also subject, maybe also may trigger some lawsuits. And so by the time everything is all said and done, we still won't have, definite numbers. At 95%, that's the best that they can do usually in July.
Okay.
We do anticipate some protests in light of COVID-19, because some businesses are saying, I have lost a lot of business, and now my business, my property is not worth as much. The state pretty much is saying this is not a natural disaster, and therefore they are not necessarily looking at any adjustment in valuation. But that could change between now and July.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome, sir. So here the other line item that we see on the other income, you can see that $1.9 million difference, variance, negative variance, and that's directly related to the interest income estimate. And Mr. Flores was very diligent in looking at what we anticipate for interest income. This is really based on more like 25 basis points for the entire year. We went from $2.2 million budgeted or projected interest income for this current year to $250,000. This kind of reminds us of several years ago when our interest income was also very low, just like that. So when we look at the total operating best case scenario revenue projections, including our self-supporting program, $151,991,919 to support a baseline budget that I'm going to talk about in just a minute. And so actually, if you were to compare with what the current budget is for this year, it's an increase of about $4.2 million or 2.83%. So all these next slides are slides that you have seen before. I don't know if you want me to go over them. I know for the sake of time, I'm certainly willing to do that. I don't know if you wanted me to go through all of these slides and explain each slide before I get to the baseline budget, or if you would like me to just move on to the baseline budget and then I explain the budget strategies or the different budget scenarios that we have to present to you. So I know you've been very acquainted with all of these charts. This chart just basically shows the same information that I showed a while ago. That shows the $151,991,000. And so you can see here the appropriation or the allocation of those revenue sources and how they comprise the total $151.9 million revenue sources.
Hi, this is Christina. I'm okay if we move to the strategies section of it, but I'll that's just my take. If anybody wants to go over these slides, that's fine too. But I think that's probably the critical piece in all of this.
Ms. Charity, this is Carmen. I agree with Christina. I think that where I had the bulk of the questions was in the CARE Act funds, and I think you've answered all of what I was interested in knowing. You and Dr. Serrata and everybody has good information. So I'm comfortable moving forward because we have this anyway, and we want to come back and ask questions on it later.
Yeah, this is all preliminary anyway.
And certainly you have all of this detail in your packets. You're in the paper copy of the budget presentation. So we have a chart on revenue sources, the one on projected expenditures by function, all the projected transfers, your projected expenditure by expense category, where you can see the bulk of our budget is, of course, and it makes sense, is our faculty salaries along with our staff salaries and associated benefits. The projected benefits, one thing I do want to say about the projected benefits, especially health insurance. Later on, when I'm talking about any potential reduction in state funding, what I have not incorporated in those budget strategies, because we don't know yet, is that they're also going to decrease our health insurance appropriation. We get $7 million a year, which represents 50% of the total. And if they decide to cut, let's say 10%, that represents $700,000. That means that health insurance budget that you see here at $7.5 million, that would have to be increased by $700,000. So just wanted to kind of have you understand that we may be facing that also. So really quickly I wanted to talk about really quickly on the baseline budget, because this is something that obviously we have to fund. That is the reason why we presented a best case scenario. And if you recall, the best case scenario was about $151.1 million in terms of revenue, as compared to now looking at if you were to adopt a budget that is equivalent to this year, 147.8, it would be sufficient to fund the budget. Now, the baseline budget here that you see, and you've seen that before, and it compares basically your baseline budget, which is generated from all the budget requests that are submitted to Ms. Teyes and her team in the budget office, along with adjusting the salaries of vacant positions or positions that become vacant during the fiscal year. So this is as of April 30th, by the way. And so this baseline budget here of $147,168,886 represents basically a decrease over the current adopted budget, between about $640,000. And here, this is truly not because we have reduced anybody's budget, but because of positions that have become vacant because of resignations, because of retirements, then those savings were realized. But it has nothing to do with reducing anybody's budget. But the salaries do get reduced from the incumbent salary to the highest level in the salary the salary base in the table. So when we're going to compare revenue, we're also going to compare that to that baseline budget of $147.1 billion. So that gives us a little bit of room to fund anything else that we need to fund for next year. Under normal conditions, this $640,000 certainly would bode well to cover other critical needs. So all these slides over here, I'll just go over that. So now here's the core really of the presentation. And so if you will bear with me, because this is actually a lot of information. I'm sure you've seen it on your handout. I had to actually split these budget development strategies into 3 slides. And I can explain each one of them one at a time, because it is a lot of information. And I'm sure it's going to be a lot of information for the audience that is listening to this and doesn't have the benefit of seeing this actually, in front of them. But trying to explain, if you would bear with me, certainly I will be glad to, if you need to stop me at any time because you don't understand something, please do. And I certainly will go over that information again. So what we started here with is like I said, this whole budget strategies are being split in 3 main sections. All sections do contain 6 scenarios, 6 budget scenarios, from best case scenario 1 to worst case scenario 6. And I will explain each column first to understand what I'm talking about. So the best case scenario, as I showed to you earlier, is the scenario that revenues are based on flat state funding, in other words, same appropriation as this year, 99% tax collection, which is the current practice, and then flat enrollment. So if you see that $151,991,919 of total projected revenue, this is the information that I showed to you a while ago. Best case scenario. Second scenario is 15% in decrease in state funding, 95% tax collection, which means we will get 4% less than normal, and 10% decrease in enrollment. And I'm going to also clarify that the 10% decrease in enrollment is really 10% decrease in the fall and 7% in the spring. We thought maybe the fall enrollment was going to take maybe a little bit more of an impact because we're still dealing with COVID-19 in the fall.
I'm sorry, what did you say for the projection? This is Christina. What did you say the projection was for the fall? I missed that percentage. What were you saying?
On the scenario 2, it would be 10% decrease in enrollment for the fall, but it also factors in a 7% decrease for the spring. And for the summer, we feel flat enrollment. We did not touch the enrollment for the summer in each one of those scenarios. So each one of those scenarios implies a certain decrease in enrollment for the fall, but it keeps the same enrollment decrease for the spring at 7%. So I just wanted to clarify that. Scenario 3.
I'm sorry, Shaughnessy, I got a little lost on that. So you're projecting the summer would have a decrease from each summer?
No, for each one of those scenarios, we are projecting absolutely no decrease over this year. We're keeping the same enrollment numbers because we hope that the situation will improve by next summer. So to be conservative, though, we did keep the same enrollment as, let's say, last summer of 2019. So some conservatism there because we think that probably the enrollment will pick up by next summer in light of the economy. But those, again, there is no per se a best scenario in this. It's all assumptions. But we wanted to show you the impact of what those revenues would cover under each one of those scenarios. Scenario 3 would be 15% decrease in state funding, 95% tax collection, and now we're looking at a 15% decrease in enrollment for the fall. Still 7% for the spring, and then flat for the summer. Scenario 4, this is where starting looking at some little worse every time. Scenario 4 is 15% decrease in state funding, 92% tax collection, and 20% decrease in enrollment. Scenario 5 is going to be a 20% decrease in state funding because we have to plan for that, 92% tax collection, and 25% decrease in enrollment for the fall. And of course, same scenario for the spring and summer. And then the worst case scenario, and we really hope this is the worst case scenario. We're looking at a 20% decrease in state funding, 90% tax collection, and 30% decrease in enrollment for the fall. And again, same numbers for the spring and for the summer. So now that you hear that this is how we have based all these budget strategies on all these scenarios. If you have any question on the definition of the scenarios themselves, make sure that I have not lost you anywhere. I'm good to go. Okay, thank you. So then if you'll notice on the left-hand side, what I have highlighted is what I have stated here. Normally, when I go over the budget strategies, I don't actually, define each revenue source here because it is so important that you see the impact of each one of those scenarios on each one of those revenue sources. I have actually listed them. So for each scenario, if you look at state appropriation right now, best case scenario, we get a little bit over $32 million. When we look at a 15% decrease in state funding, now your state appropriation would be $27.3 million. For a 20% decrease in state funding, it would go to $25.7 million. So you can see the impact of each one of these scenarios on each source of revenue. Overhead recovery stays the same. Tuition and fees is obviously very much impacted. So under the best case scenario, we're looking at $47.9 million. Under each one of those scenarios, from 10% all the way to 30%, you have a big change. So you can see from the best case scenario to the worst case scenario, it's about a decrease of $10 million in tuition and fees. And then you can see everything else in between. For the property taxes, so at 99% collection, we're looking at 65.1 property tax revenue. And then for every percentage decrease in tax collection, you're looking also at a decrease, obviously, in tax revenue from 61.7 million of the best of the worst case scenarios to all the way to 58.4 million under the worst case scenario. Other income stays the same because here the interest income is really has been already forecasted for the entire year. It is not impacted by state funding. It's not impacted, although it could be impacted a little bit by state funding. It will have less state appropriation to invest, but we are looking here pretty much the same, not to complicate things further. Our self-supporting program right now, as I said, because they're self-supporting, they just basically stay the same until we revise them down, but we will also revise the expenditure budget to reflect the same. So on this very first slide, what I wanted to show you is the impact on the budget and what is the actual budget surplus or deficit when you compare your total projected revenue for each one of those scenarios to the rollover budget or your baseline budget of $147,168,886. And so when we look at that budget surplus, without looking at any additional needs that are needed above 147.1 million, what is the resulting number when you compare under the best case scenario? Well, we have a surplus, $4.8 million. Under scenario 2, we have a deficit of about $8.3 million. Under scenario 3, we have a deficit about $9.7 million, almost $9.8 million. Under scenario 4, it's almost $13.2 million. Under scenario 5, a little bit over $16.2 million. And in the worst case scenario, that any additional requests, any other critical needs being addressed, it's a deficit of $19 million. So this very last row here, we're going to repeat that on the next slide so you understand how we're progressing and how we're addressing the other elements of these budget strategies. Are there any questions about this very first slide?
I don't think so.
Okay, thank you. So moving, if you notice, my very last row of the first slide is also the first row on the second slide, because this is our starting point. So now we have a budget surplus or deficit before any additional funding needs. So what other additional funding needs may we have? Well, under the best case scenario, we have to take into consideration that because we increase tuition, we have to have an additional transfer to our TPEG. And that TPEG is very important, obviously, for our students. So anytime that we increase tuition, we also have to increase that transfer, because that transfer is based on 6% of total tuition. It's also very much dependent on enrollment, because enrollment affects tuition and fees. So you're going to see on the very first line, on the very first row, transfer to TPEG, that each scenario is affected by that transfer to TPEG. And that transfer to TPEG impacts, what is going to be needed. If we have an increase in tuition and fees, I need to have, obviously, a transfer that is going to be an additional expense. However, if I have a decrease in enrollment, that means that I have less tuition and fees and I have less transfer. So that's why you see on the very first row, transfer to TPEG that is in parentheses, that is actually an additional expense. And anything across that row under each one of those scenarios that does not have a parenthesis that is actually a saving or a cost reduction to the budget. So I know this is a little complicated, but please bear with me. And then I can also then transfer to the Student Activities Fund, transfer to the athletic funds, behave exactly the same way. They are impacted by any increase in enrollment and impact or any decreases in enrollment. In this case, the transfer to the Student Activities Fund is impacted by the decrease in enrollment, except for the best case scenario when we are basically adjusting to what the budget should be. So the transfer to the Student Activities Fund was a little bit higher than they needed, so we adjusted it down. And then every other number that is showing on that row for the transfer to the Student Activities Fund is to reflect any cost reduction because of a decrease in enrollment. Transfer to the athletic fund. So here, under the best case scenario, you see $79,000 that would have to be transferred to an additional transfer to the athletic fund. And the reason why, it takes into consideration the $2 that the board approved when the tuition and fees increase was, or the tuition increase was approved last February. So there was an additional allocation from that tuition increase that went to, that goes to the athletic fund to support their budget. But if you notice that additional amount is going to be decreased as we get into the different budget scenarios that account for decreases in enrollment. The overhead, so those are additional funding requests that we need to consider. We're going to need some additional funds to fund electricity for the new facilities, the utilities in general. We also have factored there an additional $100,000 for insurance, and then another amount that is needed to cover our EAP program, to the tune of about $60,000. So in total, we're looking at about a little bit over $500,000 that we do need to fund for next year. New facilities, in light of the additional facilities that are coming on board, that represents the prorated amount of full year of operation for Northwest, for Mission Del Paso, for the Valle Verde, and also for the Rio Grande. So those were amounts that we had presented to you back in February. So when we're looking at the total additionals that need to be really considered in addition to the deficit is about it's about $2.4 million for the best case scenario. And then as each scenario progresses here, you can see under the worst case scenario, we will need additional about $1 million because all those transfers that we all know that are part of the budget now are going to decrease. So that's the reason why the total additional, that number for the total additional is a little bit lower than under the best case scenario. This is a lot of information to digest. When you consider those total additional and you compare them to the budget surplus or deficit before those additional, now it's going to yield obviously less of a budget surplus and a higher deficit under the different scenarios. So for example, under the best case scenario now, when we consider all of these additional, looking at a budget surplus about $2,356,000. Scenario 2, we are looking at a deficit of about $10 million, a bit over $10 million. Under scenario 3, you're looking at a deficit about a little bit over $11.3 million. Scenario 4, a bit over $14.6 million deficit. Scenario 5, a little bit over $17.5 million. And in the worst case scenario, we are looking at about almost $20.2 million. So this is now the this last row that I just explained now is the starting point for the next row, for the next slide, I'm sorry. The next slide, this is how we propose to fund those deficits under each one of those scenarios. And it's certainly not an easy feat. It requires some very difficult decisions probably to make in the next few months, should any of the scenarios pan out. So under the best case scenario, we have a budget surplus. So we certainly, although we certainly would recommend that if we were to have a best case scenario, that this kind of surplus be put in some kind of a biennium reserve to get us over the hump in case we do get a decrease in our funding for the following biennium. It is very unlikely that we'll have a best case scenario. So we're probably looking more so at a scenario 3. But each one of those scenarios shows how we can approach funding those deficits in each one of the scenarios. So for example, on the scenario 2, and all of those, by the way, all of those scenarios are going to be looking at the same kind of approach. It could be a combination of those. It could be a totally different approach, but certainly we want to look at some scenarios that, or some ways, some potential budget reduction that, by the way, other than freezing vacant position, do not make any kind of recommendation of reductions in force under these scenarios. So I wanted to be very clear about that. Although there'll be some difficult decisions to be made in terms of what we're going to choose as a budget reduction. So for example, biennium reserve. Currently we have in our budget, untouched, $1,959,000. So that can be used against each one of those deficits. We have an institutional clearing balance, which is a contingency fund of $464,000. I don't recommend we use that because I have a little contingency, but here we're being transparent with you in terms of what is it that we can use as pretty substantial. Reduction in travel budget. So here we just made a recommendation of half of what our travel budget is, but it could be a combination. It could be a little higher, it could be lower. We know that we cannot totally freeze $1.2 million because we know that there are some training that is necessary. We know that we have some conferences to attend, especially in the accreditation area, because our accreditation is right around the corner. So those are the kind of things that we have to look at. So the reduction in travel budget could be higher than $600,000. It could be lower, or it could be the full 1.2. But obviously, we would have to understand the impact of doing so.
Ms. Shaughnessy, hi, this is Christine. I have a question on the institutional clearing. You indicated that that's contingency. Now that's just like a general contingency.
It is.
Can you explain a little bit further that definition for me, please?
Yes. So you see what happens at the end of the fiscal year under normal conditions, when we balance our budget, recall that we give you an estimate of how much our salary enhancement is going to be. So, so when we factor that into the budget and when you pass the budget, the salary enhancement, because it is based on current positions or incumbents, not everyone may be number one eligible for that salary increase if you have not been with the college since March of that year. So in order for us to balance the budget to the amount that you approved, we put that amount in institutional, what we call institutional clearing. It's to really balance our budget. And some years it's 200,000, other years a little bit higher, depending what has happened between the time that you approved the budget and the time that we may have had some additional retirements that had not been taken into consideration. So it's really a contingency fund. And that contingency fund may be used during the fiscal year to fund permanent things that come up that we need to fund. So, to give you an example, it could be that maybe actually a perfect example of that is we have some positions that have to be recruited. We have to do a salary exception, for example, but it's maybe higher than what had been budgeted. And this is where we take the money from to balance that salary. We have some positions, and unfortunately, if we do not offer some salary exceptions, we are not able to recruit. And then that is actually mostly in your information technology area and other critical areas. So I hope that answered your question, Sanchez.
Yes, thank you. And then I guess also in the reduction in the travel budgets, I would assume that, and I know, but I just wanted to reiterate this on the record, is that I'm sure that a lot of the travel, I would imagine, would be offered online. I know that we're, for example, I'm understanding like there's a couple of laws that require in-person training, but I don't know if that may be changed in light of where we are with COVID-related matters. And so I would just urge that we keep an eye on that, and to the extent that there is an option to participate in something online versus travel, that
Absolutely.
the option to participate online or to take that training or whatever, that be urged, that be really, I think, strongly encouraged.
Absolutely, Ms. Sanchez.
And again,
Absolutely
and it's
right.
not just for the fact of the money. I mean, of course, we want that,
Exactly.
that save that money, but it's really for the health and safety of
Exactly.
the individuals that are traveling.
Yes, ma'am, absolutely. That's an excellent point that I had certainly made earlier. The reason why we are freezing travel right now is more related to ensuring the safety of our employees. And just to give you an example, my staff were going to attend a conference with GFOA, which is the organization that actually gives us the award on our CAFR. And, this is like a 3-day conference. Excellent information, and they went totally online. And we're going to be able to actually, for let's say, I think the registration was something like maybe over $300 for each one of us, and it was about 4 of us that were going to go. And the bottom line here is that we're still going to be able to take those online, and we can take them between the time frame of May of next week until like mid-June. So this is a tremendous opportunity. And this is certainly changing the way that we are doing things, and we are training. But yes, absolutely, the reduction in travel budget is merely here an example, but we may be able to use actually most of that 1.2 million as a reduction, because we're not going to be able to travel regardless of the budget. Absolutely. Thank you, Ms. Sanchez. So the next 2 rows relate to the value of the frozen vacant positions. So we had one set of vacant positions that were on recruitment prior to COVID-19. And so that has a value about $1.8 million, a little over $1.8 million. And so we certainly can apply that if we decide that's the route we want to take. We also had another set of frozen vacant positions that were not under recruitment, and those, of course, have been also frozen. And that has a value about a little over $5.4 million. And that, again, that can be also applied against the deficit. This is what we choose to do. And then the other line item that you see here, that is a little bit of a wild card. And let me explain. The cost reduction in part-time instructional salaries. So as we look at decreases in enrollment, we will not be offering as many sections. This is assuming that we have a decrease in enrollment that has not necessarily switched to total online instruction. So this model here assumes pretty much a linear calculation. So if we have a 10% decrease in enrollment, we're looking at having a cost reduction in the because of the number of sections that are being reduced, about $4.7 million. The 15% decrease in enrollment assumes that we would have a cost reduction because we're going to have less sections, about $6.2 million. And then on the 20% decrease in enrollment, we'll be looking at a cost reduction of $7.7 million. And this is, by the way, in part-time instructional salaries. Your worst case scenario, we're looking at a cost reduction of about $10.6 million. But this is a wild card because when we are offering online instruction, the class size is not going to be 25 to 30 students per section. It's going to be lower, which means we would have to multiply those sections to offer for the same amount of students that would have been taking a face-to-face class. So it's not a proven science here. We did this, and this is something that Mr. Flores developed based on the number of credit hours that are being taught by part-time faculty in relationship to the part-time faculty budget. And so there, believe it or not, there's some calculation, pretty strong calculation behind those numbers. But again, we still need to evaluate that model. We will evaluate that model because as we have more and more classes that are being taught online, it's going to change the dynamics of the way those sections are created. So assuming though that we are looking at something like that, your total potential budget reduction to cover the deficit would be enough, would be sufficient under each model to cover each budget strategies, each scenario's deficit. The worst case scenario would be looking at a surplus of $850,000 under this model, and the best case of the worst scenario, which is scenario 2, would be looking at a surplus of about $5 million. And of course, again, this is not set in stone. Just wanted to give you an idea of how we might approach something like this. Right now, this is not suggesting to have any reduction in force because we are looking at obviously impacting our current budget significantly here by looking at those budget reductions. I also wanted to point out that on your frozen vacant position that are not under recruitment, in that $5.4 million, we do have $1.5 million that is earmarked for staffing our new facilities. And it's like the staff, it's faculty and staff. And so I want to make sure here that we don't lose track of that. We cannot just freeze the entire $5.4 million because we may need that staff in our new facilities. You cannot have one person, and it's the faculty member that is teaching maybe in multiple facilities, but certainly not be teaching, at the same time in both facilities. So wanted to make sure that we don't lose track of that. So that's why I have that note, and certainly we have to take that into consideration. So this is the model, and I appreciate so much that I know this is a lot of information. And at this time, do you have any questions about this? This is still very preliminary. We're still refining. We're still obviously waiting for the summer enrollment, see how it pans out. But at this point, I will pause and I will ask you, do you have any questions on this?
I just have a question, Ms. Shaughnessy. This is Carmen. If you had a crystal ball, which scenario do you think is the most likely to happen?
So, to Dr. Serrata's credit, he feels probably scenario 3 is the most likely. We feel like probably the 15% is what we probably gonna come our way, most likely. The tax collection, the 95% is certainly, we think it's reasonable. And because, tax is due, and a lot of that tax is generated from, residential and, of course, larger commercial properties that probably can handle that. And then, of course, the 15% increase in enrollment sounds a little bit more palatable, and in light of what's going on with summer enrollment, is usually a good precursor of fall enrollment. We feel like maybe that's more realistic. But again, so if we had a crystal ball, we would hope scenario 3 is the one. We really would like the best case scenario, but we would be dreaming if that were the case.
Well, I think this situation that happened has kind of alerted everybody to be more aggressive recruiters. So hopefully the numbers will not go down in the enrollment as bad as I think they might.
It is truly our hope. So any other questions, comments? Please understand it is preliminary, and we will continue to refine those numbers and certainly come up with some approaches. Obviously, when you have this anticipation of such large deficits, it's really hard to find something like this in the budget unless you already have an already pretty flexible budget. And I believe we have a flexible budget. But at the same time, we have to be we have to be realistic. Some of these positions may need to be filled. We want to make sure that we're also, we're not jeopardizing our services, certainly for our students, but also we provide the support for our staff to do their job. And that is the balance that we have to really look at what is truly essential. And that's what we may have to look at, what is truly essential to support our mission going forward for next year and the following year. So our next steps is to continue recruitment efforts for summer ECHO registrations, which we know those efforts have been significant. And certainly that area needs to be recognized for we're also all recruiters, and we need to make sure we vet the people that we know that, hey, this is available and take advantage of it. And if you have lost your job, it's the time now to go back and certainly work on improve your skills. We're going to revise and refine revenue projections. We're going to identify costs related to COVID-19 for reimbursement by the CARES funding. Understand that those costs are not included in the budget. And so we need to make sure we get reimbursed. We need to continue our cost containment measures until further notice. Certainly, that's something that we will continue exploring. We need to continue our budget review for additional potential savings, determine what is essential versus not as essential. And we need to evaluate additional requests to be funded. Because we're still in the pretty early stages of our budget development process, and we have some costs that are surfacing that we need to cover. So we certainly will advise the board. So we need to plan for the adoption of 2021. So what is the next step? April 30th, as I mentioned earlier, we'll get a preliminary budget appraisal. On May 14th, we'll have a budget workshop we're already having a budget workshop to the Board of Trustees, which is today. We most likely will have a budget workshop, an update to the board in June. We will anticipate an updated property appraisal. So as we get closer to July, numbers are going to be refined. And in July 25th, we'll have a certified property appraisal to be accepted by the Board of Trustees. At the July board meeting, we will finalize tax revenue projections at that point. We'll have another budget workshop to the Board of Trustees. And in August, we'll come before you for the adoption of the budget, which has to be done by August 31st. And then usually the last step, and that could be done in August, most likely, since I don't believe there will be a recommendation for a tax rate increase. So we're looking at the adoption of the tax rate either in August, but for sure by September 30th, because that is the deadline.
What day are you looking at in June, Joseph, for the next workshop?
Excuse me, sir?
You got to hear that we have another workshop in June. What day in June?
I cannot, that's going to be at the decision of the Board of Trustees. Certainly, I'm pretty sure you're going to want an update on all the revenue projections that we talked about, probably an update on the budget strategies. We probably will know, hopefully by June, what the state is planning on doing. I'm assuming, Dr. Serrata, that's probably, we should know by June what the state is planning on doing. Is that correct?
We'll have a better idea, yes, Ms. Shaughnessy. Judge, the next regular board meeting is scheduled for May 27th.
Right.
I would ask the board to entertain either the 10th of June for the workshop or no later than the week of the 15th. But then after that, our next regular board meeting is scheduled for the 24th. If we do it on the 10th, it's 2 weeks in between both. That might be the best date. We also have to, just given the situation as we've been here during this meeting, the latest data was released from the county, and there were 151 new cases. 151 new cases of COVID-19 diagnosed today. So
Mother's Day, I'm sure, is certainly hit.
Yeah, we need to look at, in addition to budget, we, on April the 6th, chose to have the summer completely online. There are considerations that we need to look at with regards to our fall as we continue to monitor data to present plans to the board of what we anticipate occurring for the fall and ultimately to ask the board to support and vote in favor of those particular plans. So I think that the 10th of June would be right about just under 2 weeks. We have a regular board meeting, then 2 weeks after that, we can do another budget workshop, and then we'll have a regular board meeting on June the 24th.
It's Wednesday.
So Wednesday, if that works for the board. If it doesn't, then we'll obviously make sure that we move to whatever works for the Board of Trustees.
Y'all recommend the same time, start at around 5:30? Or 5?
I think maybe we should make it a little bit earlier. Like 3? Yes.
This is the pleasure of the board. So whatever.
It's a little, hi, this is Christina. It's a little harder for me. I can do maybe 4, but anything earlier than that, it's a little bit difficult for me to do just because of my work commitments. We're knee deep in COVID matters and it hasn't let up. So I would appreciate if we don't do anything earlier than 4.
I think 4 would be perfect. Later, of course, it gets later in the evening for all of us. It's already 8:43 right now. So, but 3 would be okay with me.
Okay. Set it up, tentatively, if this has a conflict, just bring it up at the board meeting on the 27th. But tentatively, we'll set it up for 4 o'clock on the 10th of June.
And what about the one on the 27th?
It's currently scheduled on the 27th, Dr. Graham. We currently have it scheduled at 5:30. We do have a facilities meeting scheduled. I don't know if they will be presenting to the board or not.
We haven't discussed that with them yet.
Can we move that one to 4 o'clock? So Judge, can we make the 27th of May at 4?
As long as we get it out to the public in time. We told them it would be at 5:30, but that's, I don't have a problem. The earlier the better for me this time. So tentatively, the board meeting, do you all have any objection of moving the time to 4 o'clock on the 27th of May? No objections? Then we'll set the board meeting at 4 o'clock on May 27th. Do you have anything else?
I think that was enough, Judge.
That's it?
Mr. Haggerty, I certainly would like the opportunity to thank quite a few people because, you know,
my truck, getting
I'm a
stuff
presenter,
organized.
but all of this work,
Doing. Hello, friend. Here cleaning out my truck, getting stuff
all
organized.
this work does not happen just by magic. It really is a lot of work that I would like, and that's why I would like to recognize first and foremost the budget office staff led by Laura Tejas, Director of Budget, Ms. Manteria, Mr. Mendoza, Mr. Loera, certainly contributed tremendously to formulating the baseline.
Hi there,
budget.
I'm here working on a call right now. I don't know if you can hear them presenting. Hopefully we're almost done. They're already saying thank you, so I'm hoping we're going to be.
Make sure you, on behalf of the board, please tell them that they've done a great job and we appreciate all the information. And we look forward to our meeting on June 10th.
Thank you, Mr. Haggerty.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Shaughnessy. Many thanks to the board. We certainly appreciate all of the effort that you put into it. We will continue to monitor and provide you updates of where we are in each of these areas, but certainly appreciate your time and effort on this. Okay. So, with nothing else on the agenda, do I hear a motion for adjourn?
Motion made, Harvey Graham.
Okay, do I hear a second? No second, we are adjourned? Okay, well then second, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Bye.
27 at 4 o'clock.